Drop your pencils. No more research.
I was chasing my dog. I'd rather do research.
Actually, I was saying that now you weren't going to show up because while you were researching this, you realized how awesome it is, and there's nothing to fight about.
I was wanting to fight about.
All right, so what do we need? Do we need to talk about anything? Or we just go?
Hold on,
Chris,
let me get.
You're writing up all your notes again?
I'm trying to figure out what
I have to put some of this back together.
I need a few minutes.
Okay.
You said something about the recording went quiet on me last time?
Yeah, no, yeah, like 20 seconds got cut out, just completely missing. It might have been something with Google Drive or something, like maybe the file didn't transfer correctly or something. Mine got a little bit screwed up too. I lost like a second or two, but it wasn't nearly as bad as yours. So maybe it was just me. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe something happened on my machine. I wouldn't worry about it.
You sure?
Yeah. I wouldn't worry about it. I was really just asking if you had gone in and like edited it before you sent. So like,
no.
Yeah, obviously,
just
definitely.
Just annoy stuff. That's all.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, give me a minute. It's trying to load the old one. Which seems to be taking forever.
Let's get ready to rumble.
TypeScript sucks. Drop the mic. I'm done. All right. Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
What's the name of the girl that stood on stage with Anders?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's an ex Microsoft.
Yeah. She's Google, right?
She's Google now.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to find out what her name is.
Amanda Silver?
Should be able to find it. Jules Kremer. I wonder if it's Kremer or Kramer.
All right, so how are we going to hand this off? So I'll do the intro, and then I'm going to hand it off to you?
You might want to say, like, I think the only segue I was thinking of, so I thought of two things this morning. I thought of either we just change it up on people, and I read it.
Yeah, I'm open to that.
Or you read it, and then just say, like...
Well, so here, I wrote it down in my notes right here. I've got the standard stuff. We're recording this on the evening of November 24th. In this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about TypeScript, except I'm kind of a fanboy of TypeScript, and I've been trying to convince Todd for how awesome it is for 2 years now, and finally we've taken a full week to do our research and organize our thoughts. So for the next hour or so, we're just going to lay it on the line. And hold on. That's not it. So I've asked Chris to be the referee for this discussion, but he's got his opinions too, so he's no innocent, unbiased bystander, which means that this should be a good one. And then I think I could just be like, so Chris, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah,
if you've got something to go with. I'm sorry, did you have something to say?
You're so excited.
A little bit, a little too excited.
No, well, I'm excited because these are all the thoughts that have been swimming around my head, and I've never actually sat down and like written them out this way. And so I'm like writing it. I'm like, yeah, TypeScript is awesome.
So I have a question.
I have a couple questions.
Oh, of course.
So TypeScript is the language that Angular 2 is written in.
Yes.
It's not just that like Angular 2's first-class TypeScript support, and we think it's the preferred language you should use. It is written in TypeScript.
Yes.
And apparently using Visual Studio Code.
Yes.
Which I call bullshit on.
That's today.
They started using Visual Studio Code like
for
the
the
presentation.
Yeah.
Nah, they loaded it up in Visual Studio Code and go compiled. Yep, we used it.
They're like, yep,
No,
we're
so-
using
No, over the summer when I went to Angular U, all of the Google developers use Visual Studio Code, and I'd say probably
What?
30-40% of the other presenters use Visual Studio Code. The others use IntelliJ or Sublime Text or something.
Now, do you think it's because the Google folks is this a coordinated thing, or do they just like it?
Yeah, I think it's both. It felt kind of like a coordinated thing. It felt kind of like they were selling Visual Studio Code, but why? What?
Yeah, we can discuss. I don't know if that's worth discussing. I kind of have this weird opinion that Google and Microsoft are teaming up to move the web forward, and then they want to both turn around at Apple and say, what's the problem, dude? iPhones suck.
Ding, ding, ding. Good answer.
But the problem with that is
my enemy is my friend.
The problem with that is when I think about what my wife will say, she'll be like, so? If it doesn't work on my phone, it's a stupid website.
Yeah, well, that's Apple's stance.
And then I'll say, well, Apple sucks, so it's your problem. Jess,
sure is.
With your phone, your Apple products.
What do you mean, you guys with your non-Apple phones?
Exactly. We are not fanboys. You've become a fanboy.
I'm willing to admit when I'm a fanboy.
I listen to the podcast on this phone, by the way. The Lumia 640 is $39 right now during Black Friday.
That's because nobody wants it.
It's because it's a great phone. Look, it has a replaceable battery. All I got to do is open this thing up. I can replace the battery. I can add 128 gigs of storage. But, I can't do that on the iPhone.
I replaced my battery in the iPhone.
Did you need to do that?
I did.
Was it out of warranty at that point?
Come on, that's neither here nor there. That thing loses its warranty the moment I get it.
But one of the things that did hit me, though, is we are going to need a rundown of what TypeScript is.
Do we? I was wondering about that today. That's a legitimate question. I'm thinking we just get into it, and we our battle just kind of explains what it is. I mean, unless you want to give it a brief overview, just be it's a extension of ECMAScript. It's a superset of ECMAScript 6. Well, and just kind of leave it at that.
If you wanted to say that.
That's an opinion.
I'm not saying that really it needs to be this full-fledged school. But we have to find the middle point between what they show on stage, and you've got to figure that's where most people stopped watching, if they were watching at all.
Yeah.
And a Pluralsight course. We don't want that either.
No.
In fact, just a few minutes ago, I was talking to Rich, who gave some feedback on our last two podcasts. He said they were good, and he liked how we try to. He specifically kind of called out how we're trying to explain how you might use this stuff at work instead of just.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think about that too. I'm gonna guess there's if we went to a user group and said hey, how many of you use TypeScript? We might get a couple hands, and then we get a lot of people who, how many of you have heard of it? And you get a lot of hands. Do you know the first thing about it? Not really. I don't know much about it. Just that I was told it was great.
Jess said it was cool. Todd was grumpy and said it was not cool and it was not the right solution to the problem we're trying to solve.
Save it for the podcast.
Exactly. So a couple quick things. Number one, during the Connect thing, I thought it was interesting that Anders had to explain what it was. He did take a minute to explain what TypeScript was.
I think I think it's for the same reason, right?
So here was my original thought with this. I think we got to kind of, and maybe it will flow out in the questions. We almost need to come up with what are we arguing over? Because my argument isn't that TypeScript is bad or good. It's that I don't like these things.
Well, that's what I hoped Chris would come up with.
Or general argument.
I was hoping Chris would structure the conversation.
Okay, so you don't even have you don't want to state your position.
No, I do. I am absolutely willing to state my position. I have no idea. I cannot answer your question. Is what I'm saying. I don't have a good way to structure it. I don't really have an opinion.
I guess I'm muted somehow.
You're not.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, really?
It keeps saying that you're muted, but as it's saying that, we can hear you.
And now my video.
Oh, I need my lower third.
Yes, we need to get the lower third.
Is my video gone now?
Nope, you're back.
You were gone for a second.
Yeah. You return.
So I turned off the default the whatever thing that says by default turn on my lower third.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't had any problems. So I think that's the problem, is when it comes on by default and it gets all fucked up, it gets halfway turned on. So I just go on and turn it on manually every time.
Chris has joined the video call. Welcome back, Chris.
Yeah, what a freaking weird, stupid thing.
Welcome to the Static Void podcast.
That was fun, Jess. We should argue again next week.
I will say this, is that one of the things I thought about a lot was that if the answer is merely that I just don't want to use it, that's a tough, and I'm not trying to say, I mean, that's a tough place to go, right? Because Jess could say, well, I want to use it, and I don't know if that helps anybody.
No, well, and I put in my notes, if the answer is I don't want to learn it, shut the fuck up. Like, no, I'm sorry. You're a developer. Learn it. You know, like, you judge it. That's not one of its merits. That's you judge it by all of its merits to determine whether it's worth your time to learn it or not, but that's not one of the merits. So, yeah, I mean, Chris, maybe you can just kind of load your first question and just basically be like, so TypeScript's a superset of JavaScript, and it adds static typing, and why does that appeal to you, or something like that, right? Kind of like high-level overview as you ask the question. And then Todd can jump in and say, well, I kind of disagree with the fact that it's even a superset of TypeScript.
So
here's or JavaScript, yeah.
So let's
TypeScript. That's going. So here's my problem.
Well, hold on, wait.
Yeah, don't.
Now, I think there's another potential, Jess, that this may be a heavily edited show, and not because of not because of the conversation.
And I'm going to be doing the editing.
But because one of the things I was also thinking about is that in natural conversation, in the last time that I kind of did this, I would say things like this would be the tone, right? So Jess, tell me why you're a big fan of Halo 5. And I stopped and realized that I might want to slow down and leave enough space so that in edit you could cut off the word Jess.
Yeah.
Cut off the question so that the conversation, or one or the other, just based on how it sounds, so that way, instead of it feeling so directed, even just cutting out the words, I might say something like, and what is it that people like about TypeScript? But what I really said is, so Jess, what is it that people really like about TypeScript? And then, but then the edit is less forced.
Yeah.
It might just be, what is it people really like about TypeScript? And then you just jump in, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm gonna.
Yeah, I've done that. I've done that already, but it's hard when you say so.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to. I thought a lot about that, and I'm gonna try to consciously slow down.
Yeah, we should all.
It'll probably sound like you'll probably hear pauses, but I kind of feel like maybe pauses instead of pause words like or so, or the fast talking.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure I do all the time is. If I might say something like, well, one interesting thing about this is that's all worthless.
Yes.
Except if I bleed it into the rest of my sentence, then you can't do anything about it.
Yes. No, well, I can. It just sounds a little choppy. It sounds a little unnatural. It sounds like you just jump into the middle of a word.
So certainly, I'm just going to try to get us into a back and forth. We'll see how that goes, and if it doesn't work, then well, whatever.
So here's my point. We all know what TypeScript is. I think it's wrong to assume the audience does.
Oh, I do. I agree with you. I don't think the audience does.
I think
the audience knows what features it brings.
I think you need to list out the bullet points. What is it? Why was it created? What are the goals? Just two or three bullet points.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm guessing that's going to come out in the conversation. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying those are going to be our points. We're going to say we're going to make comments like, well, this was added because blah 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 blah, right? And we're not going to sit there and explain exactly what it is, but we will refer to it and we'll give a little bit of backstory in the argument.
I guess you could do it sort of. I'm just concerned that if someone sees this and we start arguing about things and they're like, what the fuck is TypeScript? Why are they arguing over this? This seems like such a trivial thing to argue over.
And then they're going to want to learn more about it. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm thinking that it might just work itself out. If we don't explain it and somebody comes into it fresh and literally has no idea what it is, listening to either they're going to turn it off or they're going to listen to the whole thing and they will have a pretty decent idea of what it is. Maybe not like specifically what it is, but at least they'll have heard about the merits and the warnings and all of that stuff, and then go and look into it more. It's like giving a user group presentation, right? You're not trying to teach them what it is. You're trying to.
True, but you usually just set the stage. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly,
I'm willing to try without it because we always do that right in the beginning, right? You can always add that afterwards, I guess.
Or we can always take it out. I mean, if you want to do it, if you want to go ahead and just do it, and then we'll run with it, and then afterwards we'll kind of talk about whether or not it needs to be in there. After we've done all the content and we've covered this stuff, then we can kind of go back and see whether. I'd rather do that than add it in after the fact. That just sounds really unnatural. I'd rather have too much and cut it down than add stuff.
To try to add something, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should have Chris explain it.
Okay, yeah, great. You got that, Chris, or?
Hold on. You might as well ask me to explain Haskell. That's not totally true. I actually know a little bit about it.
I mean, there's like 3 bullet points, really. It's a subscript of JavaScript.
Here's what I have. I have
the adds ECMA 6 and 7 stuff, and it has types.
I have superset. Superset of JavaScript that adds strong static typing, a tighter concept of classes and interfaces, and introduces ES6 and ES7 compatible features.
Done. Those are the facts of the case, and they remain undisputed.
Won't disagree. Whether they are the right solution to the right problem.
Todd's going to get up here and he's going to do some fancy lawyer tricks.
Oh, yes.
But you have to remember.
What is that from?
Well, from every court show ever, but I'm quoting.
No, that's specifically from something. What?
A Few Good Men.
Fancy
Say it. You can't handle it.
That's what Kevin Bacon says, huh? He's going to come up and do it. Yeah. All right.
So I'm definitely going to at one point say, you want the truth?
Yes, I do.
Jess, how did you know where to go at mealtime?
You're telling me that in all your years there, you never had one meal? Oh no, 3 squares a day.
But how did you know if it wasn't in this book?
Follow the crowd of chow time, sir. I can quote the entire movie. I mean, we could go, right? We could record this, and then we could go back and do TypeScript. It's fine with me. Oh, you want to talk to my boss? He's right up the road up there in the big white house.
Truth. You want the truth? All right.
Alrighty. Let's have fun.
You're a lousy fucking softball player, Jack.
Boys are going down. Can't stop that now.
Oh, you strenuously object.
Is that how it works? I object. Oh, but I strenuously object. Oh,
I've seen this movie a lot more than I have.
I worked at a movie theater that was playing it, and so that was part of it.
I worked at a movie theater too.
Probably looked at it as if to say, "Pa, a mailbox."
And the other thing is I got to notice like what people did in movies, and so you remember the scene? Remember how in A Few Good Men they start talking about how they have to find Markinson? Like we have to find Colonel Markinson.
Yes.
Who is his right-hand man or whatever, and he just disappears. When that scene happened, inevitably every time I could hear the audience, a ton of whispers. I'll go, "Who's Markinson?" And I think it's because they just totally blew that part of the movie. Like they didn't strongly explain who he was and what his role was and why he was so important. And then he shows up in Tom Cruise's backseat, and I still heard people like, "What?" Like I heard that every time without fail. If I walked in at that scene, like I'm an usher and I walk in at that scene, I would hear like, "Who's that guy he's talking to?"
So Jeff, we're not going to talk about TypeScript. We're going to talk about memories of working in the movie theater, right?
The good old days, man.
Yeah,
movies aren't like that anymore.
I have fond memories. I was a projectionist too. That was even more fun.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Cinecast.
Yes. Movies aren't like that anymore. I don't think it's the shared cultural experience it used to be.
I don't know. There are recliners now. and Octavia Mall, you can pre-order your exact seat you sit in. I already have mine set for Star Wars. It's like, Nice recliner.
Did you get like an airline chart, an airplane seating chart?
Oh, pretty much. You should get online now.
Yeah.
Before the movie starts, please make sure your recliner is
Yeah.
right
Position.
in a locked position.
All right.
Okay. I guess we're gonna. Oh, I guess I should turn on Audacity.
Oh yeah.
That'll be good. So, Chris, right? We agreed you're going to mute Jess the entire time.
I'm gonna
Right.
mute Jess.
Yes. Well, we don't agree with his point. Just mute him.
Well, nobody's noticed our friend hanging on the wall back there.
Oh, no, it's too high. We can't see it.
Is it too high?
It's too high. I didn't do it. I was gonna do it. I didn't do it.
Coward.
Too high. I don't think I can lower it. I found there's a nail in there that I punched the paper through.
Well, you have to lift your camera up.
That's true. Can do
You can
that.
zoom in.
Is it Anders? Is it black and white?
It's not Anders.
Douglas Crawford.
Oh man. Hopefully not to do that.
He's. Oh, that's right. I need that other. I think I threw it in Todd's notes, so I have it.
That's great. That's so great. I'm just gonna be staring at him the whole time.
Remember, he has the right solution to all our problems.
Oh, don't even get me started.
Get rid of JavaScript. Get rid of HTML.
Well, that's not what he said at all. But he did say.
He did. He wanted to get rid of HTML.
Yeah, I think that HTML he would agree, but really he's more upset about just the web in general and its general insecurity,
Yes.
and that there's nothing we can do about it unless we
There's
start
plenty
over.
we can do about it. There's plenty that can be done.
We're not going to start over though. We're not going to get rid of DNS. We're not going to get rid of our certificate system. So that means
But it doesn't exist anymore.
we'll have DNS poisoning and we'll have certificate attacks, and that's just how it's going to be. That's how the world will be.
We could just turn it off and restart again. We have so much knowledge now. We will go skip all the mistakes. Like YouTube.
Yeah. Version 2 will never. Funny thing about it is version 2 would never be as good, and we'd always be like, "Why isn't it as good?"
Well, they were the military and was trying to create version 2. I don't know what happened to that.
All right.
All right, let's do it.
Recording volume set, and I think I'm ready to go.
All right. I'm sorry. I forgot. You were out the day they taught law school.
You're gonna randomly mention something, we're all just gonna laugh. Right in the middle, too. We'd be like going, "This is evil. We cannot have types in JavaScript.
You can't handle the truth."
You can't handle types."
All right, are we ready?
Yep.
Here we go. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void Podcast. I'm Jess Chadwick,
I'm Todd Snyder.
And I'm Chris Gomez.
and we are your hosts. We're recording this on the evening of November 24th, 2015, and in this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about TypeScript. Except I'm kind of a fanboy of TypeScript, and I've been trying to convince Todd of how awesome it is for about 2 years now. And so finally, we've each taken a full week to do our research and organize our thoughts. So for the next hour or so, we're just going to lay it on the line and just battle it out. I've asked Chris to be the referee for this discussion, but he's got his opinions too, so he's no innocent, unbiased bystander, which means that I think this should be a pretty good show. So without further ado, why don't you take us off, Chris?
Right, thanks, Jess. So TypeScript was a language unveiled to the world in October 2012, and standing on stage to do it was Anders Heilsberg, who I think most people widely know as the father of C#. I mean, in previous lives he was heavily involved with Pascal, but came to Microsoft to challenge Java with the C# language. And he introduced this new project that he had a part in leading, TypeScript. He told the world that JavaScript was not suited for, quote, application scale, and that static typing was truly needed to enable things such as enterprise-level IDE support. In 2014, TypeScript was declared a 1.0, and it actually moved to GitHub. And just last week at the Connect event that we talked about at our last podcast, Anders himself stood on stage with Jules Kremer from Google to confirm to the world that TypeScript is the language that Angular 2 is being written in, and that they're using products like Visual Studio Code. So TypeScript has really moved forward quickly in just a matter of 3 years from being a language that was a superset of JavaScript. I believe Anders would always say that all valid JavaScript is valid TypeScript. And then what TypeScript does is you work in this language that provides you a tighter concept of classes, some static typing, has some features that are compatible with the upcoming ES6, the ECMAScript 6 version of JavaScript. And then it compiles down to JavaScript at build time, and so it's actually TypeScript is not actually delivered to your browser, but the compiled down, or sometimes we use the term transpiled down, JavaScript is what gets delivered as part of your application. So, having heard that JavaScript is not suited for application scale, and knowing that there have been some other contenders to the throne of a JavaScript replacement language, Jess, why do you think we need TypeScript?
Well, for me, it basically comes down to static typing over dynamic typing, right? And so that's going to be a lot of my arguments in this discussion are going to come down to that, and it doesn't really have anything to do with JavaScript in particular, although JavaScript does have its shortcomings that TypeScript does help you overcome. For me, dynamic languages have been historically more productive, but they do that by cutting all of that pesky explicitness, right? And so for me, explicitness is kind of a good thing. So meanwhile, statically typed languages help avoid many kinds of bugs before the code even runs. And it happens at the expense of your bloody fingers because of how much typing you need to do, right? That's kind of what it comes down to. So, but the power for me with TypeScript is that it allows you to take advantage of either the power of JavaScript's dynamic nature or the safety of static typing, or you can just switch between the two, right? Whenever it suits you. So you can actually leverage both at the same time. You can use JavaScript's dynamic nature and static typing and actually combine them when it suits you. And so it's like this great middle ground, because JavaScript underneath it all, at the end of the day, it's all just JavaScript. And JavaScript is a dynamic language, and you kind of throw types on top of it just at compile time, not at runtime. You throw typing on top of it, and it helps bring it to that next level. It helps kind of get around all of the drawbacks of inherently in pretty much any dynamic language. You also mentioned other transpilers, so it's not like transpilation, writing JavaScript code in another language and then kind of parsing it down or compiling it down into JavaScript is a new thing. Like CoffeeScript has been around for a really long time, and that was really that was really popular when it came out. Still is popular, but mostly because it allowed you to. It kind of helped you get away from some of the downsides of JavaScript, some of the tips and tracks, the downsides, double equals versus triple equals, and that kind of stuff. Some people liked it because you were able to develop in a little bit more expressive manner. They like the syntax of CoffeeScript better than JavaScript. But ultimately, what it comes down for me is that TypeScript really is just JavaScript. It's JavaScript plus some more stuff, and it's that more stuff that is really just truly the icing on the cake. But at the end of the day, it's just JavaScript.
Okay, so TypeScript adds some features that especially a C# developer would be used to, and I think, Todd, it's fair to say that you're a fan of .NET, C#, and languages that embrace some of these techniques. Static typing, having real strong public-private encapsulation. So in light of all that, why not TypeScript?
So, from my point of view, the problem isn't TypeScript. It's what are we trying to solve? What is the problem we're trying to solve? If you look at the bigger picture There's lots of other things that do transcompiler stuff. There's just mentioned CoffeeScript. There's Babel. There's some other ones that do that kind of stuff. Even Microsoft at one point had a way of taking C# code and converting it down to JavaScript code. And even on the CSS side of things, there's like Less and Sass that's trying to reinvent better ways to deal with pure web stuff. And someone who spent pretty much nearly 6 years really studying web technologies, JavaScript and CSS, I just don't think they're solving the right problems. I think they're just adding layers on top. That at the end of the day, when I'm living in the browser, where I'm doing my development, I live in the browser. I live in the Chrome tools. I'm looking at CSS. I'm looking at JavaScript. Whether it's TypeScript or Less or Sass, I'm writing one way, and all of a sudden when I'm running in the browser, it's a different thing. And Jess mentioned that the TypeScript solves a lot of problems for JavaScript, and I have to disagree with that. It adds a layer that does give you some compile time checking, but ultimately the web is dynamic in nature. And a lot of times you have to deal with the dynamic nature of the web, particularly if you're getting data from different places through JSON data. There is no format to JSON data. It's just a JavaScript object serialized. And then I bring it down, all of a sudden all that type checking I had in compile time is gone. I don't have that runtime type checking. The other thing is, I do think classes and interfaces are interesting. The question is, and I really don't have a full opinion if I'm 100% for or against them, JavaScript is a functional language at its heart. It's often referred to as a functional dike-typing prototype language. And when I look at TypeScript, what I see is basically it trying to bring concepts from OOP into this functional language, which ultimately don't work because when it compiles, it goes back into pure JavaScript. So I might say class, constructor, method 1, method 2, and all of a sudden when I'm looking at the code in my IDE, it's back to JavaScript. And you mentioned, Andrews was saying it solves a lot of problems for JavaScript. Again, I have to disagree because if ultimately what I'm running in my application is JavaScript and I have to debug it in the application as JavaScript, it's still JavaScript. Adding types and things aren't the right answer. Now, I've changed my opinion on transcompilers. I'm still have very mixed feelings about them, but I actually think that the web is moving in a couple different directions, some things I'm hoping we can talk about at some point that I think are more important than adding types.
Okay, so let me drill down to one of those points. Let's forget for a second maybe what your opinion is on whether you want a language that's statically typed, dynamically typed. Let's just throw all that out for a brief second and say, at its heart, the purpose of delivering content to a browser, to the user that's going to come to your website, is you need to bring down to them HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For a long time now, we have had a lot of ways to do that, maybe using server-side frameworks like ASP.NET MVC, other languages, or nowadays we're starting to maybe use some client-side frameworks. In the end, we're getting them HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Are you saying that because that's what gets delivered to the browser, that you place an importance on that that's above the need for developer convenience of having a programming paradigm they might like?
So I ultimately think it comes down to preference for the developer. They have to decide what makes sense. I'm not telling you don't use TypeScript. It's evil. You have to figure out if that makes sense for you. The problem I have with it is ultimately when you need to debug your application, which when you're writing web code, when you're writing web development, you're doing it almost every minute, every second. You're not dealing with TypeScript. You're dealing with JavaScript.
Because you debug in Chrome typically, right? That's where you live when you're debugging.
That's my IDE almost.
Well, so I got to jump in here because that's just not true because there are source maps.
Well, that's where I was going to come back to, Jess. And why don't we take a second? I'll let you finish, Todd. But I was going to ask you in your day-to-day work, how do you get back to your source code? And so go ahead and introduce source maps for us.
So it was funny. I was actually going to mention there are source maps which are kind of interesting. But I kind of look at it as, well, that's good and convenient for the developer. That's not ultimately the code my end user is running. I want to deal with the code my end user is running. I don't want any extra layers on top.
Is it easy to use source maps, Jess? How does it feel for the developer working on this?
Support has been increasing. over the past couple of years. Last year or so, I guess early last year, early 2014, when I first started really heavily using TypeScript, the source maps just sucked. And I don't know if it was the source maps for TypeScript, like the source maps that the TypeScript compiler output, or if it was just source map support in general. But I mean, source maps at their heart are just a browser feature. They're a browser. I don't know if they're a standard, but they're a de facto standard, meaning that they are a file that maps the JavaScript that is output from a transpiler to a certain line and even character of code in the source code. In other words, if you use CoffeeScript, if you use TypeScript, then the code that is the JavaScript code that is running on the browser, that variable, that is a JavaScript variable in the browser, will get mapped to that variable back in the CoffeeScript code or the TypeScript code. And so when we're talking about debugging, you actually, if you put a breakpoint, you can put a breakpoint in your TypeScript file, and you can actually, it's all magic, right? So the source code, the source maps are all magic, meaning the browser is mapping in between the JavaScript that is running and the source code that you're looking at, and it appears like you're stepping through. So to Todd's point, it is an extra layer that is not actually what's running, and I appreciate that point. But in practice, it really it doesn't matter.
You could say it's like our C# debugging. There's a PDB file, and it's linking symbols back up so that we can have the illusion that we are stepping through this code line by line when that's really not actually what's happening.
Exactly.
So let's get away from that abstraction. And if you have an answer, this would be awesome for the folks listening. I've heard Jess talk about source maps. I think that sounds great. I want to try it out for myself. Is it easy to do in Visual Studio? Do source maps get sent down to the client as part of the delivery? What's going on there?
So from what I understand, the browser will ask for a source map. Or no, I'm sorry. When the transpiler creates the output, the JavaScript output, at the end it has a directive basically that says here's your source map, right? Here's the address for your source map, and it'll give a source map file name. And whenever the browser sees that directive, it goes and it tries to grab that file and it'll pull it down. So it's the responsibility of the compiler, the transpiler, right? The TypeScript compiler or the CoffeeScript compiler to add this directive at the end of the compiled JavaScript, the transpiled JavaScript, and then also produce the associated source map file that is available. And so when you deploy your application, you're deploying your JavaScript and you're deploying these source map files if you want to be able to debug. But after that, it's all pure native browser implementation. The browser will get it. The browser will use the source map to map lines of code to lines of your source code, lines of JavaScript code to lines of your source code, so that when you get in there and you're actually debugging, you set a breakpoint on the TypeScript file, and then you can hit F10, you can hit F11, you can dive into it, you can hover over it. You can hover over a variable and see the value, and you get that full, rich debugging support right there in your TypeScript file. At least it looks that way. And frankly, that's all that matters. I mean, and you bring up a great point, Chris, that you're running IL. When you're running .NET, you're running IL. And you're looking at PDBs when you're debugging that.
Right, sure.
So,
yeah.
I mean, Todd, do you debug IL? I mean, do you run IL? That's a layer of abstraction.
Actually, I have, and sometimes. I think that's an easy way direction to go to say it's like IL, but that's not correct because the browser's interpreting JavaScript. I'm not sure how source files work.
Interpreting IL.
Yeah, but ultimately, I want to step through the code. I want to step through the code the end user's using. The other thing to keep in mind is, and I want to get too caught down in debugging here, is when you take a step back and you look at JavaScript and the problems of JavaScript, there are types. The types are quite weak. There's number, there's string, there's date, which someday someone will solve date, but until they do, it's hell. And then there's objects or functions, right? Even though you can argue object and functions are something slightly different. When I go into a type system like .NET, C#, I get ints, I get floats, I get longs, I get shorts, I got structs. That's a full type system.
Nah, it's the same thing. I mean, you have more number types, yes, but other than that, it's the same thing. You're just saying you have a limited number of primitive types.
I have to admit, I'm not looking for. Well, so it depends, right? But there's a part of me that is actually happy to have one number type. It's just that it's possible that the JavaScript folks picked the wrong one because we need a number type that works well with decimal.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm not saying that this is exactly going to be a problem. I don't exactly have a math problem in front of me that is, but if 1.01 plus 1.01 is not going to be 2.02, that doesn't help most application developers.
Yeah, seriously.
And so you could my point of view, Todd, is just like, I think they picked the wrong type, and I have to admit, somebody had to tell me that. I didn't know that until it was demonstrated to me, and then I said, boy, that's too bad, because I'm not sure that, and it's purely for a systems level language. Do you need more direct control over the memory and the size and the ability, what your numbers can do? I think so, but if I treat JavaScript as an application language, I don't know that I care about that. But I understand that that's a problem.
Well, and to be clear, when you define a type dynamically in JavaScript, and when I say define a type, I mean define a structure, define an object. When you create an object and then you just start adding properties to it, the browser, any browser implementation, any JavaScript implementation is defining a type for that. It's doing it on the fly, right? So there is a type system in every single JavaScript implementation today. It's just a dynamic type system, and you just never really have to worry about it. The only times you really have to worry about it are for performance, when you're looking to really tweak out the same performance. I saw the Internet Explorer guys, the team came and did a presentation that I saw where they were talking about why you want to structure your code a certain way, and they say if you create an object literal that has two properties, a name and about two properties called name and value, right? And then you define another object literal that has value defined first. It has two properties, value and name. Those are two different types. Right?
Well, that's implementation specific, though, right?
It's implementation specific, but
don't get me wrong. I know it's important, but
the browser is doing it anyway under the covers.
Right.
That's all I want to point out, right?
But the spec is saying they're both objects.
Yes.
And the objects are just property bags.
Yes, in practice, you don't really have to worry about this, but
there is a cost.
So talking about TypeScript, okay, so that leads to a great segue. In JavaScript, there are intrinsic objects, intrinsic types, things like number, boolean, array, function, and then there's a string, and then there's some weird ones, like you said, Todd, like date and regexp, which I'm not sure we use on a daily basis because they're weird and strange. But one of the ones that we come back to time and again is object, which in the end is really, and for the JavaScript purists out there, let me put this in a nutshell. They're really just property bags. Here's a property, here's a value, here's a property, here's a value. And when I get an object from you in a function, when I get an object you call a function of mine and pass an object, I basically just say, well, is dot duck there? It is? Great. Then I can use it. And I'm not going to know immediately whether it is a string or a number or even another object, right? So let's talk about how TypeScript changes that equation. And what does it do for us, Jess, in terms of defining, just to give an example, defining parameters, defining what we might think of in C# as instance variables, data members of a class, quote unquote.
So the first thing you're going to notice when you start using TypeScript and you start using an editor that supports TypeScript, that understands TypeScript and offers you IntelliSense, the best editor that I've used so far is Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio, the full Visual Studio is also really good. There's others like WebStorm, and pretty much any kind of mainstream editor these days has support for TypeScript. And so you'll start getting IntelliSense, and you'll start getting IntelliSense just right off the bat, just because TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. You'll actually start getting some IntelliSense on your JavaScript objects. And so the thing that you get out of the box with those native types, things like date and things like regex, is you'll actually start getting really good autocomplete just from the beginning. A lot of people dismiss that to say that any good JavaScript editor already has good autocomplete on things that are out of the box, so it's not really buying you much, and I completely agree with that, right? But then once you just go the one step further, where you start defining even just very basic classes or interfaces or just very basic types, be they classes or interfaces. Now all of a sudden your IntelliSense gets a lot more intelligent. Now instead of saying, you hit dot and you get all of the options that you can select for all the members on that instance, with a JavaScript editor, with pretty much any JavaScript editor today, it'll say, here are all the properties and methods, the names of the properties and methods that you've ever referenced in your entire project on any object ever, right? And you can start typing, right? You can just start typing. If you're typing name, you can start typing N, A, and it'll kind of limit down the list, right? But with TypeScript, it'll say, here are all of those members on this type that you're using, the type of this variable right now. And you only had 4 of them. You only defined 4 members on there, and so here are those 4. Pick one of your 4, right? And you literally, it discourages you from typing anything else. Of course, you can ignore the IntelliSense and you can just start typing whatever you want, because ultimately it's JavaScript. It's still dynamic. You can still do that. It's legitimate. But TypeScript is helping you just by kind of limiting your options to the correct options.
Okay, now when you go to compile this TypeScript, the fact that you tried to send a string parameter into a function that you said takes a number for that parameter, what will it do?
It will warn you at compile time, and it will continue to compile down to JavaScript, and so it'll just tell you. It'll say, hey, you probably don't want to do this. It'll give you the red squigglies in the editor to show you you've got a quote error, right? This is a syntactic error, basically. Not a syntactic, in other words, in the terms that your code won't run, but syntactic in that, from all of my knowledge of this code, this is not a proper member. This is not a member on this instance. So
does it still generate the JavaScript?
Yes, it's not going to stop you from doing anything. Right? You have to have pretty massive. There are classes of errors that it just simply will refuse to generate it. But they have to be pretty bad, and frankly, I don't really know exactly what they are, and it hasn't really gotten in my way.
Okay, so that's for type mismatch. What about for just if I go, like you said, there's great IntelliSense, so that when I take an object down and it knows about what it believes you would think of as instance members, data members on that object, and I go and just add a new one, .duck or .whatever. Again, that's a warning, but it'll still go ahead and create the JavaScript. And I guess if we don't know, it's not super important.
Yes.
Idiomatic TypeScript, you writing proper TypeScript wouldn't do that because you're getting the warnings.
Yes, right. You're getting the warnings. You can also do things like casting. And casting in TypeScript is a little bit different than a traditional statically typed language, where casting is literally taking that object and representing it as another type. Casting in TypeScript is really telling the TypeScript compiler, for this instance, for this reference that I'm casting, treat it as this type. So it's still duck typing. Okay. But it's telling TypeScript, hey, okay, treat it as this type, right? So in other words, you can define this object. You can define an instance of an object, and now you can go crazy with it, right? You can define it as an instance of one type, and then you can cast it to another type and start interacting with it on that type with full IntelliSense and everything. And you're still working on that same object. And so now that object, via duck typing, which is exactly what JavaScript encourages, right? It is both of those objects at the same time. It's both of those types at the same time.
Okay, so Todd, if we use TypeScript and we get the static typing, which prevents type mismatch, getting the developer intent correct that they wanted to pass this type, and also known instance members of a quote-unquote class, are we losing features of JavaScript that actually make it effective and useful for you from day to day?
From the limited amount of TypeScript I've done over the last few weeks, I haven't seen anything. What has been more of a concern to me, which is ultimately one of my concerns, actually I have a couple other concerns, but one of my big concerns is the idea of what we refer to as a leaky abstraction. Ultimately, I have to know what the JavaScript is doing, and a lot of the examples I've seen are very basic examples. And I know Jess has built several applications with this, so I think he has a better feel exactly where some of the pros and cons of the transpiler, what it's doing. So ultimately, I think you're not losing anything, which is a good thing, but I think it gives you a false set of hope. Like, all right, I've compiled code. I've never seen so many developers I've come across go, my code compiles, it's good, it doesn't have any errors, doesn't have any bugs. That's not correct. Compiled code is just one step. Actually testing the code and making sure it works in the environment you need to work in is critical. And while adding types is an interesting thing, it just feels like we're trying to, I hate to use this term, but putting lipstick on the pig. I feel like we're trying to pretty up our objects and things, and it gives you that false sense of reality. Now,
is it that JavaScript is the problem, Todd?
Without a question. Actually, I think it's even bigger than JavaScript. It's that the complexity of building applications, and maybe this isn't for everyone. Maybe this is just something I run into since I tend to be very focused on building very complex UI applications. I don't write a whole lot of JavaScript code. If I'm doing my solution correct, I'm writing very little JavaScript code. Most of the time, it's make an AJAX call, get some JSON data, wrap it into a view model or controller, and take advantage of the frameworks that are doing stuff. Now, do I have to write JavaScript code for UI things? Yes. But a lot of the times where I'd want classes and things, I've actually went away from that. I used to be very big on I had to create a class for every JavaScript thing. And I started to realize it's just so much extra overhead from a developer point of view. Most times, I'm just working with my JSON object, which to me is where TypeScript falls down. Is I've created these types and things like that, but ultimately I'm bringing in data does get some level of type from the server, right? Because I'm defining if I'm using Web API, I'm defining a class as strings and ints and things, except for dates. We'll avoid dates, but dates are problems. Ultimately, I'm taking that dynamic object and I'm sticking it into another dynamic object, because that's what's running in the browser itself. There's still dynamic objects. Now, just brought up the IntelliSense. I can't argue that you probably can be much more productive, and having the warnings probably does help you. But I'm really concerned about the idea of this leaky abstraction. I haven't played enough with it to know, but I did what I consider some things I might be interested in doing. And one of the examples I found that I thought introduced something kind of interesting is the idea of a callback, which are paramount in JavaScript. Almost everything you do beyond basic stuff require callbacks. And when you deal with a callback, you have to start dealing with the dreaded this, which, coming from a C# background, you think this has a certain meaning. You think it's the current class or the current thing you're working in. Where in JavaScript, it's not. It is the current thing in context. Well, I'll give you a good example of this. We've all probably used jQuery. If I create a jQuery click event, and then I call a function, when I'm calling that function inside, this is the button itself. And if this isn't defined, it's the window a lot of times. So in the example I came across, what they were doing was a set timeout, which has its own set of problems in JavaScript, but sometimes you need to do it. And I thought it was kind of interesting how it tried to solve the problem. So in my TypeScript code, I had this, in this case it was greeting, this greeting. Then in set timeout, I was just alerting out the message for this greeting. And that's what I wrote in TypeScript side. When it compiled it down, it used I always use self, but there are other ways of doing it. It basically used closures, because ultimately, in JavaScript, when you have a callback, there's a type of closure. The parent function, the callback function is a child function.
It closes over it, right?
Yeah, and what it ended up doing was it ended up taking this, and it stuck into another variable called underscore this, I believe was how it was done. Then inside, it was doing that. And that's a very simple example, but working with several hundred developers over the last 5 or 6 years working in JavaScript, a lot of them for the first time, they get very confused by this.
Yeah, no, there's no question that this is this concept for developers that are used to anything from C++ to C# to Java are going to say, wait, I thought that what that keyword meant was, the object, a reference to this particular object. But in JavaScript, that's a strange thing, right? Because there's really no such thing as classes. So what does that mean exactly to say that I'm writing a function of a class that needs to reference, the object? What does that mean? And really, this is kind of a concession to try and make JavaScript appealing to Java developers of the day by saying, well, here, I'll give you this construct that makes you feel comfortable and at home. But I think, Jess, that TypeScript is trying to make this keyword meaningful again.
Well, No. So TypeScript is, well, I can't talk to what TypeScript is trying to do, but what TypeScript does is it implements actually an ECMAScript 6 feature of lambda functions or arrow functions, which actually just abstract that whole thing away from you. So, I mean, the problem you're talking about, Todd, is when you have a function and within that function, that closure, you refer to the keyword this and you have no guarantee of how that function is called, which can change the meaning of this. What TypeScript does for you and what ECMAScript 6 arrow functions does for you. What TypeScript does for you is implement ECMAScript 6 arrow functions, and what those arrow functions do for you is they automatically just fix that closure. In other words, they save a reference to this, which is exactly what you think it is, meaning the thing in the outside scope before the closure has been created, saves it to a variable, passes it in. That good old, var self equals this trick, right? That's fundamentally what it's doing, but it does it for you. So it is purely syntactic sugar, because that is literally all it's doing for you, is keeping a reference to this outside of the scope and then passing it into the scope, so you're guaranteed that it's always the same thing. But it is amazing syntactic sugar. I mean, this is great. Like, this is one of those things where it just keeps you from running into those errors completely. Like, it just guards you from that class of error altogether just because it saves that reference for you. And one would argue that if you were, quote, doing it right, then you would be saving that reference and passing it in yourself, and you would save yourself from that. But this is one of the biggest problems, especially for folks new to JavaScript, is closures and understanding what this is. And so I'm not saying it keeps you from having to understand and know about the whole closure and this issue. And if you're listening to this and you're not sure what we're talking about, you absolutely need to look into that and read up about it. But it helps you as a more seasoned developer just not have to worry about it, not have to think about it anymore. You don't have to know about it, even though you still should. You don't have to.
See, can I jump in real quick? See, that's the part I disagree with. You're going to eventually have to look at this JavaScript code and understand what the heck it's doing. You're going to have to do it. You can't live in this world where I only have TypeScript to deal with. It's a misconception. So.
Yeah, and this is just JavaScript. As I said, this is an ECMAScript 6 feature. It's just JavaScript.
Yes, but ultimately the browser currently isn't able to run ECMAScript 6, right? Doesn't TypeScript compile down to like ECMAScript
right? So literally all this does is creates one more line in the compiled JavaScript. It creates one more line that saves a reference to a variable of this, and it passes that variable in, and it replaces all references to where you're using the keyword this. It replaces all of those references to the variable this that it saved for you. It's actually called __ this.
Yeah.
So if you think of it that way, it is syntactic sugar, and it is a drop-in replacement, and it ends up being exactly what you expressed, exactly what you intended.
Well, I think to Todd's point, if I go into the TypeScript editor and I use its syntax to make a class and set some things to be private, and then I go look at the resulting JavaScript, what I see is a pretty clever implementation of, an immediately invoked function expression that basically creates a closure over an object that it creates that reveals a few pieces of itself. And so, yes, in the end, it ends up being JavaScript. And I will grant you this. I go look at the 3 lines of code in TypeScript that ended up producing something on the order of 25 lines of code of JavaScript and saying, yeah, there is a lot of boilerplate in the JavaScript idioms that we've come to use. That's absolutely true. Is that the benefit, Jess? Is more readable intent?
Well, hold on. So yes, it is, but you got there through something that might be a little bit confusing. So we just went from talking about this, which is actually changing your JavaScript code and kind of changing it around to basically better express your intent. So I'd argue, yes, it is changing it, but it's changing it to what you meant to say anyway, what you intended to say anyway. Then we started talking about private protected, these access modifiers that ES6 adds. I'm pretty sure, I was trying to do research, I'm relatively certain that ES6 adds these. If not, that's fine, JavaScript or TypeScript adds them. Let's just say that then. So when one of the detriments of JavaScript has always been that it doesn't have true encapsulation, right? So Todd, I agree with you. JavaScript is not object-oriented. There are a lot of object-oriented principles that it just doesn't implement or implements very poorly. You can kind of do object-oriented programming, kind of, but it's not object-oriented, right? And so one of those things is encapsulation and access modifiers like private and protected. So if I'm in C#, if I'm in Java, and I say a method is, or a method or a property or a field is private, that literally means the compiler will at compile time refuse to compile any code where another class tries to reference that variable or change that variable, right? JavaScript doesn't offer that. So what TypeScript does is this is where a case where it does not change the outputted code, right? It will still output that code. So if I define a field in TypeScript that is private, I define it as private, and then I go ahead and set it anyway, even in my TypeScript code, if I set it anyway, TypeScript will yell at me, it'll throw errors, but it will still compile that code, and that code will still run, and it doesn't change the fact that I am accessing that. All that private and protected do in TypeScript is express my intent. It tells TypeScript, the TypeScript compiler, whenever I try and access either of these things, first of all, just don't even show them as options in the dropdown, right, in the IntelliSense. And whenever I do try and reference these things, yell at me. But if I really go ahead and I do it, then
But if you're going to use TypeScript, why wouldn't you heed the warnings? Like, that's the whole point.
No, you would. You absolutely would. You absolutely would. So I'm just saying that it's still JavaScript. That's my point that I keep coming back to, right? And so why wouldn't you, Chris? Is because you're going to find yourself in these situations when you're first migrating your code over. So one of the, if not the best thing that I say about TypeScript is that, especially where we are today, where TypeScript is new to a lot of people, is that you've been writing TypeScript this whole time. Because TypeScript is JavaScript plus some more stuff, you're already writing TypeScript. If you're writing JavaScript, you're already writing TypeScript. And so the migration path is literally rename your .js files to .ts files. When you do that, you're going to start getting all of these warnings and errors that I'm talking about. But your code will still transpile. It'll still generate that JavaScript. And then you can just go through and start getting rid of these errors.
Well, is what you're saying then is it's not an all or nothing migration. You can go part of the way there. You can say, hey, I know you're yelling at me, but we're cool for now, and I will get to it.
Exactly. So some of those errors and warnings might be legitimate things, like you're trying to do this and you shouldn't be doing it, like it's just wrong. Those are the things that you should heed and fix your code immediately. I have a story. When I was trying to do a presentation, I was trying to show how powerful TypeScript was. I built a whole little sample application, and my intent was to get the full thing working, and then once I got it working, go back and add some of these bugs so that in JavaScript, so that when I converted to TypeScript, it would show me these bugs. So I wrote the whole thing in JavaScript, and then I went back and I converted it to TypeScript before adding the bugs, and I had added bugs already. Right? I had created bugs that converting to TypeScript had shown me. And granted, that's a sample app, but it was that even blew my mind, and I intended to do it in the first place, right? The other thing is that if some of these warnings are things that you really truly intended to do, right? In other words, I want this field to be private everywhere except for this one place where I want to break that encapsulation, I want to break that privacy, and I know what I'm doing,
like
leave
friend.
me alone. Yeah, exactly. You can tell TypeScript to butt out. Right? So in any of these scenarios, you can always fall back to JavaScript's dynamic implementation, right? Or in the cases where you're really trying to take advantage of JavaScript's dynamic typing, where you're doing some wacky, crazy dynamic stuff that just types are basically just going to get in your way. You can always say any. You can use the any type, and you can tell TypeScript this type is any. The type of this instance is any. So just butt out, right? Don't give me any warnings, don't give me any error, don't just treat it as a normal JavaScript type, meaning, just don't give me any feedback. And so you've got that full range, right? So you can just convert it, you can start ignoring those errors and those warnings even when they're giving them, and then you can actually, when those errors are legitimate or not legitimate, because that's what you intended to do, you can tell JavaScript via the any keyword, don't worry about it. And then the other cool thing is that when you convert over, I kind of alluded to this earlier, that TypeScript knows a lot about kind of the primitive types, the native types, the regex and the date type and everything. It will also be very intelligent about, it's called implicit typing, where since it knows about all of your code, it can kind of follow the call stack up. So if somewhere way down in your call stack you return a number, right? You have a function that returns a number, and then you call that function and return that value and return that value. You can go like 3 levels up, and TypeScript is smart enough to kind of follow that value up and follow that type up all the way up to those 3 levels where it says, okay, this is a number, right? Because this function way down here 3 levels lower returned a number, then that means that this variable is a number. So all of a sudden, without adding any type information, all of these things just kind of start lighting up. And then when you go in and kind of strategically add type information, you get more and more of that, right? So it's actually pretty impressive how just by adding a few strategic types here and there, you actually get a lot of value without fully converting your code over to TypeScript.
So TypeScript gives us a class feature. ES6, the new JavaScript, gives us a class feature. So Todd, do you want that feature, or is there something about it that makes you say, hey, I still want to just stick with JavaScript?
So
ES5 at least.
Yeah. So do I want classes? So coming from a C# background, yes, classes are important. How I approach development using design patterns and things, it's helpful to have classes. Interfaces would be helpful, but again, because it's more of a syntactic sugar, I'm not sure I would use those. Ultimately, though, again, take a step back. I get classes today. Now, it takes a little extra work. There's design patterns that have been adopted. There's actually a lot of controversy around using them, but you can use the module pattern or the revealing module pattern to get a lot of that same concepts of the private and
you can get a lot of encapsulation. You can close off.
Now, what I've discovered, and we pretty much do this exclusively doing this, it does require some extra code.
Sure.
So a little bit I looked at TypeScript and ECMAScript 6 doing stuff. It does seem like I'm running less code to achieve that same thing, which would be a plus. But ultimately, I have concern that the idea that it made me lose my train of thought. Sorry, guys.
You always stop to read. You don't have to read.
Because I thought it was important to read it.
Not while you're talking.
Well, why did you type it? Sorry, guys. You have to cut that out. Anyway, back on track. So you can achieve classes and things today. And I would say one of the advantages I've seen so far and what I've seen with TypeScript is it seems like you'd write less code, which would be a plus. But I still get back to the idea, and Jess brought it up with the AnyType. Unless you really force developers, I feel like they're going to end up shooting themselves in the foot. They'll try to put types in, they'll ignore the warnings, or they'll put any in to work around things, or they just won't put types in altogether. They'll fall back to that same mantra.
But don't you think they're doing that now with JavaScript?
Yeah, well, that's ultimately, I guess, the thing I look at today is, even in JavaScript, I see so much crazy code. I've seen a bunch of people who came from a WordPress background, and when they go to create their JavaScript classes, they're like following what they would do in WordPress, and I'm like, there's no themes. You don't name all your classes theme dot whatever. It got very confusing, and ultimately that sort of leads me into a sort of another question or concern is. And my opinion is starting to change in this because of what Angular 2 is doing with TypeScript, and Microsoft and Google working together doesn't give as much credence to my concern. But I've been around this block before. I've worked with a lot of Microsoft technologies for web. They get popular, they start getting used, then all of a sudden something else comes around and they drop it or they realize it didn't work. And ultimately concern is the web is huge, right? I mean, recently I read somewhere where 25% of the web is WordPress, which my response was, that number sounds low. Because like every site I go to now seems like it's a WordPress site. And then in 5 minutes I hack into it and go, oh great, look, it's a WordPress site. I can easily tell it's WordPress. That I just don't, I'm concerned that there's a cap at this number of people who are going to use it. And with Angular 2, even that, there's going to be a cap. I mean, I use Angular every day. I know Jess uses Angular pretty much the same way. It's used every day. But there's so much more to the web than just that. And maybe I'm looking at it wrong. Maybe if I'm looking at it, well, I'm building an application, so maybe this is the right tool for this job. but trying to take a step back, not drinking the Microsoft Kool-Aid, because I've drank plenty of it. I've helped make some of the Kool-Aid sometimes. I used to be a pretty big fan of freaking SharePoint. Even still today, there are times I will evangelize SharePoint. That I just felt like, I don't know, that I feel like...
Well, you don't want to adopt it and then have it go away, and you're pretty confident that JavaScript isn't going away.
Yes.
So is it that you'll take new features to JavaScript as they come through the spec, through the browsers, and not so comfortable about taking them through TypeScript because TypeScript doesn't get the adoption that it needs to? Google decides in Angular 3 that, you know what, people aren't really thrilled about the TypeScript thing. I'm making all of this up, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had a few customers who went really to TypeScript, and unfortunately they went too early. They were like version 0.2, and as things change, because it wasn't a 1.0 product, a lot of things changed, and they ended up writing a lot too much code, and they had to change a bunch of it. It's good it's always JavaScript at the end of the day, right? I mean, at the end of the day, because I get this JavaScript code, if tomorrow TypeScript went away, I would just delete my TS file and take what's generated, and off we go.
Yeah.
And for the most part, with anything web, I mean, does it ever really die? I mean, I could use HTML3 if I wanted to do things, and just blinking text isn't going to get me very far.
So I think that's a legitimate concern, but it's a legitimate concern for any language, especially a new language. I would not consider TypeScript at this point, at the end of 2015, new. It's mature. It's adopted. It's widely adopted. It's only growing. And so while I'm not necessarily arguing with you, like there's always the threat of it going away or declining, but that can be said of any technology.
Correct, which is ultimately some of the challenge I have. The guys I work with, we always joke the framework of the week or the fast food framework of this and that. And being someone that has to work with a lot of different customers, I got to be very picky when I pick certain technologies and things. And I kind of lumped up.
Well, you got to outweigh the benefits, right? You got to weigh the benefits versus the drawbacks, and you got to judge the technology on itself. And while I'm not saying that its staying power shouldn't be a factor, but it's kind of much lower on the list, right? If it solves your needs, especially today, and it's relatively mature, it's relatively, reasonably considered that it's got staying power, then I'd say that's good enough to go, right? If it's really solving a lot of the problems that you have. If you're having a lot of the problems that TypeScript or language X or platform X solves, then it's probably a good fit for you.
Well, I could argue I had a pretty good damn platform that Microsoft invented called Silverlight that solved 99% of the problems I face every day, but it didn't work. It failed.
Because it was a
plugin. I had
plugin.
to face that reality and embrace HTML and JavaScript, which I'm not huge fans of. I use them because those are the language that it's the lowest common denominator. And from my point of view, someone who has to consult 20 or 30 different companies at any one time, I can't force them to use X or Y. I can't tell them, hey, let's use Silverlight because it's the right technology. There's drawbacks to it.
So JavaScript is the lowest common denominator, so raise the denominator up to TypeScript so you can actually start taking advantage of some of these next generation features that aren't supported in the browser today but compile down to the implementations of JavaScript that are supported in the browsers today. And that is an argument for transpilers in general, not TypeScript in specific. So what TypeScript offers is a next-gen ECMAScript support, but also typing, right? And so whether or not you should use a transpiler to use next-generation features today, that's one part of the equation. And if you say, yes, I do want to do that, and I'm not sure who wouldn't, I mean, you really should be doing that, then your choices, you've got a handful of choices. And so now whether or not you would choose TypeScript over something else like Babel is the type system that it offers above and beyond that, right? And so are you having the kinds of problems, or will you get the kind of productivity out of the TypeScript system that TypeScript provides?
So it's funny you bring it up because that is my argument. I'm not convinced yet that I should be moving to ECMAScript 6. That is going to really give me what I want. Now, like I said,
why wouldn't you?
Well, now ECMAScript 6, which obviously we can do a whole show on, is a series of features, some of which are almost no-brainers, and some of which maybe aren't so.
Yeah.
And
Well, right.
let's concede that the one we can argue about is class. I mean, we could sit here and have a whole show where we argue about class in ECMAScript 6. And even if we all agreed, I'm sure we could find people who would come on and argue with us about it.
Well,
Yes,
sure.
there
Well, no, but
definitely
we'd already talked about the arrow function, right? The arrow function actually solves a problem that a lot of people have. It fixes the this keyword in a closure for you without you even thinking about it, right? So it is purely syntactic sugar, but it actually actively helps you avoid that class of
Well,
problems.
and the let declaration of variables tends to, most developers are comfortable with block scope. Most are just comfortable with it, and JavaScript provides you function scope, and sometimes you have to spend 10, 20, 30 minutes and several slides to explain to a new JavaScript developer or even a seasoned JavaScript developer
plenty of season ones.
what var is really doing
Yep.
and what is happening when you don't use var.
Yep.
Yes, that's
And
the big one.
so let, if you sort of just do this adoption of let, which is in TypeScript, right, Jess?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So you just do this adoption of let, and you solve a whole class of problems where you just tell your developers, look, it's the block scope you're comfortable with. So
Well, right. Again, that calls back to the fact that was your intent in the first place, right? When developers were
Right.
writing var x versus let x, they were intending to do what let actually implements, but the wacky way that JavaScript handles stuff with the block scope and function scope and all of that, it screwed it up. And you look at the code, and it doesn't execute the way that it looks. It doesn't execute the way that you express it.
it doesn't execute the way you express it when you come from C# and Java.
Yes, right.
There are folks in other languages who are like, what are you
Right.
talking about? Function scope is a thing. Now, granted, they're not
Right.
the enterprise languages that we're used to talking about.
Right. Right.
So it sounds like maybe, is there a middle ground here for both of you where could you use TypeScript and use these best features that you could be really confident about, Todd, but then Jess, what if I say forget it, I'm not going to buy into classes? Is that possible?
So there are in the way that you define types in TypeScript, or you have two ways. You can define classes, meaning use the class, the ECMAScript 6 class keyword, and create classes just like you're used to in any other static typing language with constructors and methods and properties and things like that. Well, fields, or getter setter properties.
Right.
Or there are interfaces. And
Yes.
interfaces, which are almost the exact same syntax as interfaces in C# and in Java, interfaces are purely compile time. They're purely to express your intent, and they're get completely stripped out. They're contracts. Yeah, they're defining the contract of the object, and they just get completely stripped out. Whereas when you create a class, that class actually generates code. It generates a class because typically classes will have some kind of logic inside of them, right? It's not just a property bag, as you said, Chris, right?
There's
it's
like
not
a
just defining
constructor
properties.
almost always.
Right, you have a constructor, and you can express logic in that constructor, and blah, 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 right? And so class becomes syntactic sugar to just help you implement that prototypical inheritance. So when it gets rendered out, when it gets transpiled to JavaScript, it gets rendered into a constructor function, and then function.prototype.method, function.prototype.property or whatever, and it implements the kind of proper canonical prototypical classes that you're supposed to be writing in JavaScript. Supposed to meaning, if
you want to follow the constructor function pattern, right?
Right. And so many alternative patterns have emerged over the years just because writing, at the very least, using that prototypical pattern and saying .prototype, blah, 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 very verbose, very, kind of obnoxious.
There's a lot of boilerplate there, yeah.
A lot of boilerplate. And so for that and, other reasons, these other patterns have evolved, like the revealing module and everything. And as I keep saying, TypeScript is just JavaScript, so you still can use those patterns, but you have to far less, right? So patterns like revealing module and the module pattern, they help implement encapsulation, true encapsulation, taking advantage of that scoping and creating a closure that a variable will live in, so you literally physically, it is practically impossible, short of like jumping into JavaScript memory and finding it and manipulating it, it is practically impossible to actually change that value and reference that value, versus, as I mentioned before, TypeScript just calling a value private, a field private, doesn't actually make it inaccessible, it just yells at you if you try and access it. But at runtime, if you're compile time checking all of your code, then that's generally good enough. In other words, marking that field as private is generally good enough because you're never, ever going to actually keep that field from being manipulated at runtime. If you have a rogue script on your page that goes and wants to manipulate that variable, it's going to be able to access it somehow, right? There is no protected space in JavaScript. And so what really matters is your intent and getting yelled at when you're doing something wrong, right? When you're accessing a variable that you shouldn't be. So classes.
So let's clarify.
Yeah.
TypeScript has classes.
Yeah.
It has inheritance.
ECMAScript 6 has classes.
Okay, well, actually, I kind of want to stick to TypeScript for a second because the reality is that TypeScript could transpile to Ruby someday. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but it is an abstraction, so who cares, right? I want to put this in terms that a C# developer would understand. And TypeScript has classes. It has inheritance. It has public, private, protected that you're used to.
The reason I'm making that distinction is that ECMAScript 6 has classes. ECMAScript 6 does not have inheritance.
Okay. And then it has interfaces, which is not in ECMAScript 6.
Right.
Are interfaces the big win? Is that really the biggest win? Because now you can start to define, hey, to other developers, you're defining what a function call is going to look like.
Right. So if you were to start using classes, and now I haven't really used ECMAScript 6 classes in an editor that supports ECMAScript 6, but presumably the argument I made earlier about IntelliSense and only seeing those 4 members that you defined in your class, presumably a good editor, ECMAScript 6 editor, if you define an ECMAScript 6 class with 4 members, then the IntelliSense would only give you those 4 members, right? So presumably that argument would go for a good ECMAScript 6 editor. So in that case, yes. So TypeScript adds interfaces, which are design time throwaway metadata, just more information for the compiler to give you better feedback. The other cool thing about interfaces is type declarations. And so you actually have type definition files. So if you go out to Definitely Typed, there's a project called Definitely Typed that has a bunch of type definitions, and these are C header files, right? They describe the contract of a thing without actually including the implementation. And you can go and find these things for all of your favorite open source library. It's a big GitHub project. You can go and contribute to it. If you create your own library, you can go and create the headers for it and submit it to Definitely Typed. And so all the big ones, jQuery, Angular, anything that you want, you go out there and you get these definition files or .ts files, and they give you those interfaces. It's all interfaces at the end of the day. And so they give you those interfaces, and so you can say, pull down jQuery.js, jQuery.js, the JavaScript implementation, not TypeScript implementation, and then pull down the TypeScript definition for that JavaScript library, and now you have full TypeScript IntelliSense on that, regardless of the fact that it was not implemented in TypeScript. So that's just another use of interface, right? So you use interfaces to describe the contract of your code, and then you can also have interfaces that describe contracts for other external libraries that are in JavaScript.
Do you think it's, let me start that one over.
Well, so I want to get back to classes too. I mean, that is one thing where I really do agree that's a leak abstraction, and we need to talk about that.
Right, and what I'm not sure about is I don't know, Todd, what you think, if either of us know enough about TypeScript classes to be able to comment. I mean, what is it leaky? Well, I don't know. Is it leaky? It creates a lot of code, right?
So my point with that is it gets back to what is a leaky abstraction? All right, and for most Microsoft developers, web forms is a good example of leaky abstraction, right? I don't think TypeScript is anywhere near as bad as web forms is in that manner. But ultimately, if you look at the code that gets generated, the JavaScript code, and maybe this comes down to how you approach it, right? If you've never written JavaScript code in your life, maybe TypeScript's the right thing for you to get started.
Wait, are we just talking about this, or are you doing this?
I was talking.
We're gonna cut it?
No, I was answering the question.
I'm sorry. I didn't, because it wasn't really set up well. We were just okay. Never mind. Go ahead.
You're the editor. You'll figure it out.
No, I'm not going to. That's why I'm concerned.
Okay.
No, but I mean the reason I'm asking is because this is. I mean, we should set it up properly.
So what is the setup about is TypeScript a leak key extraction over JavaScript? We've already heard that in some cases it's not because it's just implementing ES6 features. In some ways, it's acting as Babel.
Well,
but there are other features where that is not the case.
Yeah. So
again, I don't want to interrupt, but I think we're getting too caught up in semantics and not, frankly, to me, the real world. I have to live in this JavaScript. And what I'm trying to make my point is, and maybe this is how I approach JavaScript, I'm writing JavaScript code sometimes right from the browser. I'm in the command line, I'm in the console of Chrome. That's where we're running a lot of our JavaScript nowadays. So to me, because that's the world I live in, I'm just not convinced that even transpilers, or what we have today as transpilers, are buying me a whole lot. Now, we were talking before about classes, and I do like classes. So there's part of me that's kind of drawn towards that. The types to me are just another layer. And when I deal with leaky abstraction, what I'm thinking about is I have one set of code my developer's written, right? Or I may inherit this code from somebody else. And now I'm trying to deal with it in the browser, and the code looks totally different. All of a sudden now I have 60 lines of code that ended up getting generated because the developer, he tried to express one intent, but he ended up creating a mess. So now I have this even bigger mess.
I'm not so concerned. Again, source maps. I'm not saying source maps are the silver bullet, but source maps, if you're really looking to debug your source, debug your TypeScript in the browser, in Chrome, source maps solve that. You can do that, right? So that is the debug experience. So I'm not so concerned about what it gets transpiled to and what's actually running, as long as it can map back to a source map. But I do agree that the fact that I am defining a class using the class keyword and a constructor and methods and properties and all of these things, those come along with a certain baggage, especially for folks coming from a strongly typed, statically typed language such as C#. Like when you make a method in C# on an instance, on a class, it has a pretty specific meaning, and that is not the same meaning in JavaScript or in TypeScript, because JavaScript does not implement the same inheritance structure that C# and Java do. Right? So it's not object inheritance. It's not that classic inheritance. It is prototypical inheritance, which is similar but completely different. Right? So, in other words, it behaves very similarly. When you just define a quote base class and then derive from that, and then you call a method on that base class, it works most of the time, unless you've screwed something up. But it doesn't work the same way that it works in C#. Right? It happens to look like it works the same exact way, but it's not at all working the same exact way. What's really happening with prototypical inheritance, it's that it's saying, do I have a member with this name? If so, go ahead and execute it. If not, go up my inheritance tree and go and see if my parent has one. Does my parent have one? No. Go up the next level, blah, blah, blah. That is prototypical inheritance. That's not what happens in C#, right?
Well, not to mention that in JavaScript, you can create that inheritance chain on the fly. Exactly. And that's not possible in C#. And I mean, this is a whole show on prototypal inheritance, right?
Yeah. No, but this is one of the big downsides. This is one of the big downsides. This is where it can become a leaky abstraction. If you are trying to write classes, and classes as they are in C#, they're not the same, and so they look like you're using the same keywords to define them, right?
Sure.
And they look syntactically almost exactly the same. But the implementation, and to your point, Todd, what actually gets transpiled down is completely different, and it operates at runtime completely differently.
So the idea of a leaky abstraction is, all right, so I've built this class, or I built this inheritance structure, right? Which a lot of people coming from the C# background they're used to that, right? They're used to types, they're used to the way this works and things like that. Well, my concern is they're going to still approach it like C#. They're not going to think like a JavaScript developer. Because if you think like a JavaScript developer, and you say, all right, I want to use classes, and ECMAScript gives me this, and then TypeScript gives me this, you're probably going to be fine, because you probably already understand how prototypal inheritance works, and closures work, and how the apply keyword works, and some other things.
Yes.
But if you approach it as, I'm a C# developer, or I'm a Java developer, now I'm writing JavaScript code without really understanding JavaScript first, I think you're going to create a lot of problems for yourself.
Absolutely. I think this is probably the one statement that we agree most on, right? So going back to it, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. It is not a port of C#. It is not, has nothing to do with other static type languages. It is a superset of JavaScript. It adds type information, compile time type information to JavaScript. And so the first step, learn JavaScript. Specifically, learn ECMAScript 6, right? Because then you can leverage all of that stuff. Learn JavaScript, learn prototypical inheritance, learn all of that stuff. Now use TypeScript and ECMAScript 6 to take advantage of that syntactic sugar to do it better, right? So if you're a C# developer, it's going to be very alluring to you. It'll probably be much quicker to pick up because the syntax is very similar. The concepts are very similar, at least from superficially. And so conceptually and syntactically, it would probably be pretty easy to pick up, but that's no excuse for learning what's actually happening underneath in terms of JavaScript. Not underneath in terms of what is being transpiled out. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the concepts of prototypical inheritance, the concepts of closures.
Right. So ultimately, though, isn't that the problem or one of the big challenges with web form developers had? They tried to abstract away the entire web and create a mess.
Well, then we got huge view state.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying TypeScript is exactly the same.
Right.
I'm just a little concerned that I can see people shooting themselves in the foot.
No, because
basically.
it is not a leaky abstraction. It can be a leaky abstraction if you start applying those C# concepts to it. If you start applying that classic inheritance concepts to it, when it's not, it's prototypical inheritance. So it looks like it might be something else, and if you treat it as that something else that it's not, then it becomes a leaky abstraction, and it's not obvious that you're doing that, right? If you don't know any better, then it becomes a leaky abstraction and it's going to bite you. But if you know what prototypical inheritance is, if you know how to use JavaScript, it is not a leaky abstraction. It truly is JavaScript plus some extra stuff to help you out.
So we brought up a couple of things that I want to kind of touch on a little bit. We talked about a little bit of ECMAScript 6 having classes and things. The other thing I want to kind of talk about is we talked a lot about do you have to compile this code, right? And I guess we should talk about that first. We have to compile TypeScript code, right? We have to have some compiler there. Visual Studio comes with one. Visual Code comes with one. Jess, you mentioned like WebStorm and some of the other things come with one. IDs and stuff come with one. What if you're working in an environment where you're not really compiling code? What if you're like WordPress or SharePoint or like a lot of people, even in my case, I'm building a lot of applications. They're just SPA, pure SPAs. There is no server-side component involved at all. Do you think those types of people eventually they will take advantage of TypeScript?
So that is one of the downsides. So I have in my notes for this show, I have the good and the bad. Those are my two categories, and of course my good list is 20 bullet points. But one of my 5 bullet points of the bad is that it's one more build step. There's no getting around that. It is not just JavaScript that runs in the browser. Even once ECMAScript 6 is fully supported, your types are never going to be, well, I'm not going to say never. Maybe TypeScript will be supported in the browser one day, or at least in Edge. But
that opens up a whole other can of worms.
It's not ECMAScript 6. It will not run in your browser. It's certainly not ECMAScript 5, right? And so you do need that transpilation step. My argument against that's a perfectly legitimate concern, and if you do not have a build step today, then we will have to add that. You'll have to download the tools. You'll have to learn the tools, and by learn the tools, it's a very simple command line, or integration into whatever your favorite editor is. and so I'm not dismissing any of that. That is more stuff that you need to install. That's a bigger development environment. But my argument is that if you don't already have a JavaScript build chain, why not? Right? At the very least, you should be minifying your JavaScript code. Right? And so, in other words, even if you are writing pure JavaScript today, even if you're writing ECMAScript 5 JavaScript today, the JavaScript that you write should never be the JavaScript that runs in the browser, because at the very least it should be minified, maybe combined, right? And so, by the time you're doing that, adding types to it is just one more thing, and then now you just use another tool in your build chain, right? And so it is a legitimate concern. It's one more step, but it's a step in a build chain that should already be there with standard JavaScript.
Which is a good point. Unfortunately, I've run across quite a few places that don't even do that. The concept of minification is it's a foreign thing, and sometimes they get them to do that.
You don't need to do that. You can write JavaScript, and then you can just FTP that JavaScript to your server and run it happily without being.
Or you can throw it all on your HTML page and be happy day.
Exactly. Yes.
So ultimately, I think that is when I started thinking about ECMAScript 6, which I can't remember how long it took to come out, but I mean, I think it was in review for quite a few years. It's cool to edit the classes and arrow functions, and I'm sure I will be taking advantage of them. But I guess I'm kind of looking at the bigger picture, and maybe this is the problem, why I'm hesitant for TypeScript, is it doesn't seem like it solves the problems I think are important today. Like adding types and adding classes, it doesn't sell me. I feel like there's so much other problems wrong with web development, I'd rather focus on those problems. And ultimately when we deal with ECMAScript 6, it's like, until the browsers support it, how many people are going to really use it?
It doesn't matter. That's the beauty of any transpiler, is that it doesn't matter. You're compiling down to ECMAScript 5. So you are now, as a developer, able to take advantage of the productivity gains that ECMAScript 6 provides, but you are still writing compatible code that will run in any browser today via ECMAScript 5. So and then when the world finally catches up to you, then you can just drop the transpilation step.
So a couple questions related to that. One is, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. There's probably some good people that could argue that having classes isn't necessarily going to increase your productivity. We're looking at C# developers as being a good thing. If you never come from a C# background, you could argue classes are an extra layer of complexity. It's not really making it more productive to you.
Classes?
Well, it's kind of changing the conversation from TypeScript to even just JavaScript, and so I've hesitated to do that because I feel like there's a whole show there, but I can tell you I don't care at all about classes coming to ES6, and the reason why is I still think the underlying platform of JavaScript is still objects that are bags of properties that link to other objects through their prototype that I'm free to change for any reason. And the class syntax is syntactic sugar, just the way the async await syntax in C# is syntactic sugar for a state machine that implements your callbacks for you. I mean, that's a horrible nutshell, but it's the truth. That's all I feel the ES6 class is. I actually feel the TypeScript class is probably stronger.
Yes. So I agree. So I agree with your criticism of ECMAScript 6 classes. If it sounded like I was pushing for them earlier, I was not. I was just stressing that this is a feature in ECMAScript 6. But in other words, you don't need to define a class. You can define types in TypeScript simply through interfaces. In other words, when you compile, when you transpile, all of that type information will just completely be stripped out, and you'll be left with your raw JavaScript. The result of that, if you do it without classes, is the reason you're creating a class is to group like code, right, and add members, methods on top of an instance. It basically implement a prototypical inheritance, right? And so either you're left with, now you have to write all of that boilerplate prototypical inheritance stuff, which is just boilerplate code that's just obnoxious to write, or you end up going and implementing the same thing in one of these other patterns like revealing module or something like that, which is much cleaner. And then you also define an interface that describes that object that you're creating, right? And so basically it's more work to do that. It's just easier to just define a class in TypeScript and do both at the same time, right? So in other words, it will generate that prototypical inheritance and also have that contract, that type information. So when you say TypeScript classes are stronger, yes, I completely agree. For that reason, when you say that when you're criticizing ECMAScript 6 classes, it's basically just an alternative to prototyping, writing all that boilerplate prototype typical code, and it encourages the misconception that you're actually doing object-oriented development, right? You're not using that prototypical inheritance. So basically, it has all the possible detriments without really much of the upside.
I feel like when I look at TypeScript after us talking about it, is I say, if you really want the experience of being able to define types, to be able to have some static type checking for you, defining contracts through interfaces, and bringing some sanity to the this keyword for someone who is used to how it works in C# or Java, and you want some ES6 features, which are pretty valuable, and even want some proposed features like async await, well, then TypeScript wraps it up for you in a bow.
Yep.
And it's going to work for you. And a lot of web development shops are already doing, I don't want to call it transpiling, but they're already doing a build toolchain anyway, because they might be using Sass or less, or minifying or bundling. And so then it's kind of, hey, this isn't really that much to add.
Yep.
If you aren't interested in types and classes, which is heresy for a lot of .NET developers, but be quite honest, something I'm interested in is treating JavaScript as the functional language that it really is.
And you can use interfaces to define functions as well. You can define your contracts for your functions. You can, in other words, you can define a type, and I'm using type in air quotes.
Yeah.
But you define the contract, the signature of your functions. So TypeScript does fully support functional programming too.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
That's interesting. That sounds like a show.
Well, so the easiest way to really truly understand that is to go and look at the definition file for jQuery, right? What's more functional than jQuery?
Oh, no, that's true. Yeah, that's right.
So it's very interesting. The syntax, it's completely different than the class-based syntax that you're going to be writing to create your applications. But it is purely functional, and well, not purely. That means some pure functions are different. It is functional. It is completely functional. So, and the other thing is with the one last thing I wanted to mention, the other ECMAScript 6 thing that it implements is modules. So ECMAScript 6 modules, or you can compile down to required JS modules, JSPM modules. But it supports modules which just encourage you to kind of structure your code better, and it just kind of implicitly, without you having to do anything, implicitly guards you from polluting that global scope. So in other words, you open up a client.ts file and you start writing in what looks like global scope, but when you load that using a module system, it gets loaded into its own scope and it's not polluting the global scope. So it really encourages that behavior and it supports it very well. The downside of that is right now, until ECMAScript 6 is implemented, and actually in order to run that, you actually need another library. There's no polyfill for that. You need a library like required.js or system.js or JSPM or something to actually load those modules. But that's another very intriguing thing that just kind of implicitly helps you better organize your code and again guard you from those classic mistakes of relying on global variables and things like that.
So Chris, it's funny you meant what you were talking about is I'm all for. I love classes and I definitely went out of my way to make classes work in JavaScript, but I ultimately come back to the idea that I'm just not convinced TypeScript is solving that problem well. And maybe it's because I haven't used it enough. That's the honest truth. I haven't used it enough to have a good opinion about TypeScript versus other transcompilers, and that's my own personal prejudice against it. I just don't feel like it's going to help developers. I think it's actually going to cause more problems.
Well, do you use transpilers at all? Do you use CoffeeScript or even Babel?
Nope, and I'm not a fan of them for CSS either.
Right. So you're just right. You're just not a fan of transpilers in general. Is really
I'm not. I
part of
like
the
the
problem.
idea of working in pure web technology, not
Right.
trying to add a layer of abstraction, which is funny because I love abstraction when it comes to writing code. And um, ultimately, probably my biggest concern has
You call
been,
it funny. I call it frustrating.
well, you could try, yeah, has been probably the adoption more than anything else, and the fact that Angular 2 has decided to embrace TypeScript definitely has changed my interest in it because I definitely assume I'm going to be doing a lot of Angular 2 development within a year or two, and so that to me opens the door for me to go, you know what, I need to take another look at this.
Yes. So that's kind of my wrap up. Those are my final thoughts. Is starting out with Google and the most popular browser-based MVC framework, in other words, Angular 2, and basically the rest of the world have totally embraced TypeScript. So I don't think it's going anywhere, right? We talked about it earlier. So the fact that Google and Angular 2, which is currently the most popular, arguably the most popular MVC framework right now, is behind it is, it's going to have adoption, it's going to have staying power. I'm not saying it's going to live forever, just saying in the near future it's going to be sticking around. Because of that, perhaps because of that, it's very mature, right? It's been around for a while. There's a lot of places using it. A lot of very large applications have been built, like the Visual Studio Code Editor, completely built in TypeScript, and the AngularJS framework, as we mentioned. And it's got cross-platform support, pure cross-platform support. So in fact, when I'm on Windows, my compiler, my TypeScript compiler, my preferred TypeScript compiler is actually the NPM module. So I'll actually download NPM, I'll install the TypeScript compiler through NPM, which will run on any platform, and that's what I'm using to compile my TypeScript. Regardless of the fact that I have full-blown Visual Studio, which also has TypeScript in it, I don't even use that. I use Visual Studio Code, and I use NPM, the TypeScript implementation in NPM. And then finally, it's open source, so if you're the one who likes to build languages and compilers like in your spare time, you're crazy. I mean, you can contribute right alongside with Anders and the rest of the other insane geniuses.
Yeah, sometimes you can learn a lot about something by looking at the code. I found that with ASP.NET 5, or even when ASP.NET was open source on Codeplex, or at least it was source open. How does something work? And then you go, oh, okay, I see what they did.
Yeah.
So there's at least that possibility, right?
It's definitely true with JavaScript. I mean, if you look at just jQuery, how it solved a lot of the problems, you can learn a lot about how to build good JavaScript code, or even Angular.
Yep.
I'm actually very curious as I start looking at more at Angular 2, how it solves a lot of the problems that Angular 1 had. To me, that's the real value of this.
Yep.
So my closing thought is, and I think it's good and bad. The good thing is, and we said this quite a bit over and over again, ultimately you're still working with JavaScript, right? We're not writing C# code and then we end up with JavaScript. So that means that you can adopt this as you feel like it makes sense for you. My caution to people is, do not forget to actually learn JavaScript.
Right.
And master it. I still stand by that statement. Understand closures. Understand procedural inheritance. Understand the this keyword. Understand the types and how they work in JavaScript. Then use ECMAScript 6 and then use TypeScript to make yourself a better JavaScript developer.
Absolutely.
Don't just learn it to avoid learning JavaScript, because you will shoot yourself in the foot. Sooner or later, you will have a problem that because you didn't choose to actually learn JavaScript, I think you're going to create a mess for yourself. TypeScript is not a silver bullet. It's not going to make you not know JavaScript, not need to know JavaScript. You're going to need to know JavaScript.
Yep.
So I think maybe to be a little more optimistic, I think that what TypeScript offers is something that I think the workplace has been dying to find. I am going to take a stab and say that I think that an idiomatic TypeScript developer is probably more similar to the next TypeScript developer. So if you get 10 TypeScript developers and they embrace it and use its best features and are fairly clever about it and not totally trying to do something terrible, they're going to kind of all sort of be similar. So now you can go hire a developer, because how hard is it to hire JavaScript developers? Whereas if you get 10 JavaScript developers, you get 12 opinions about JavaScript. Everything from the JavaScript developer who's actually really just a jQuery expert to the JavaScript developer who says, the language has bad parts that I'm never going to use, and that actually causes friction on the team because your other JavaScript developer is coming from C# and Java and expects to see constructor functions and the use of new. And so all of these developers conflict with each other. And I'm going to take a stab and say I think TypeScript adoption in an organization will mean you at least minimize that.
Yeah.
Compared to trying to quote unquote adopt JavaScript and then have a real nightmare of trying to hire similarly minded JavaScript developers. And that's just a thought out of left field for me when you're thinking about how you might move forward with this wide world of JavaScript and TypeScript.
Yeah. And you, listener, what do you think? Is it an abomination or is it a godsend? Are you using TypeScript? Do you plan on using it soon? Is there anything about JavaScript that you would hate to see go, or you leverage JavaScript, you love JavaScript, you never want to move away from it? We want to know. So please leave a comment on the website, staticvoidpodcast.com, or send an email to comments@staticvoidpodcast.com. We'd love to hear what you think. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on the show, please feel free to let us know through those same channels. We want to make sure that we are talking about the things that you actually want to hear about. Otherwise, we're just wasting your time or wasting our time. Chris, Todd, thanks for the chat.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. It's fun.
And thank you, listener, for spending the time with us. We hope it was valuable for you, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Static Void Podcast. And scene.
Stop.
I assumed you were done, Chris. It just seemed like
No, I was done.
Okay.
We probably could have wrapped it up a couple of times because we started. I think we repeated ourselves a lot.
Yeah. I didn't take nearly as many notes as I had in previous ones. I think I'm actually going to spend the time to listen through this and now that everything was said, kind of go back and figure out which versions I want to keep.
Yeah, I think we can. I think we could be pretty merciless on a lot of it.
Yes. Yeah.
It's interesting because since it wasn't a direct argument, it got hard to kind of go back and forth. Plus, at the same time, we were trying to make sure we got in talk about features of the language, and then I was hoping that we didn't. It would have been super easy to turn it into like, well, let's talk about JavaScript, and it's like, yeah, but we don't want to talk about JavaScript.
Yeah.
So it's tough. But then how? But Todd, maybe that's your point, right? You have to talk about JavaScript.
I know.
You have to.
I know.
So my thing is, and I know I did this, but I know Jess did too. I think we end up talking too long.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'll cut that out. That's fine.
No, but I'm saying is it was all good stuff, but I felt like we didn't have the back and forth that I was sort of expecting.
Yeah. I think that we let each other make our full case rather than like cutting each other off. I think that was a good thing.
But I just sort of expecting more like Chris asked you a question, you answered it, and then he sort of asked me a different question. It was sort of related, but I was just expecting more of a, I guess, more informal. I think we were trying to make it a little too formal.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I liked it. I mean, I go back. My first pass is really I go and I find where any one of us is talking for like 2 minutes straight, and I go and see how much I can cut out.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely times.
2 minutes straight. I
did it once. I think you did it once, where we were both like, "Are we still talking now? Are we still recording?" And then you're I am. I don't know why. All of a sudden, I'm like, I need to check this I am.
Every single time I am in the middle, you stop in the middle of what you're talking about and you read it. So Todd, mix it down to mono, because that literally just cuts the size in half. That's why it took so long to upload. Chris and I were done, and then you were like twice as long.
You want to do the noise thing, or you want to do noise thing?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and do the noise thing. Do it. Send it. Put it down in mono. I don't know if you do the noise thing before mono. I don't know.
Let me do mono first, then.
Yeah, do mono first. And
where's that at?
You can set that as like your recording preference. Somehow I did that, and I don't even know. Oh yeah, it's right here. It's right there.
It's in tracks, stereo track to mono.
Well, I just see it. Oh yeah, there. Sorry. Forget it.
And then you're saying what preferences? Where?
Well, if you want it to be recorded in mono, you see how in the middle where it shows you your microphone and it shows you your speaker?
Oh, yeah.
The middle dude says, that's it. I've just got my drop down set to mono.
Yeah. Well, my fucking headset records in mono anyway, so like I don't even have an option.
I know. That's I was thinking like with my mic, like why do I care?
Yeah. It just
Maybe my
records
mic does record stereo. I don't know.
No, mine actually just records the right channel. Like it doesn't. It is a stereo track with only one channel being recorded. It's crazy.
So I was good.
Right.
I didn't bring up my one argument that I really wanted to bring up because it would.
Why not?
Because
Which one was it?
Are you
that
saying
WebAssembly
the
list.
argument continues? Are you saying
that
we didn't settle it?
WebAssembly is really
Oh
what you're
yeah,
focused
yeah.
on.
That WebAssembly nonsense. Yeah.
A couple times I thought about it. I'm like, no,
Nonsense.
not the right forum.
It's
Open up
never
something
gonna
else.
happen.
No, it certainly wasn't the right discussion.
Yes,
There is no
but to me,
right
that's what I
discussion
want.
for WebAssembly.
I want a transcompiler that gives me JavaScript assembly code.
You
All
really
right.
just
I'm
want
not gonna
to.
care.
You really just want
I
to
get my
write C++
performance gain.
is what you want.
Well, there's.
Well, I want C# in the browser. What I really want, but I mean, I want actual control of a garbage collector. I want to extract away the DOM as far as I freaking get it away from myself.
So here's what how Microsoft screwed. Here's why you should be mad at them, right? When IE6 was dominant, they should have kept making the browser awesome, and then so people would have been like, God, I don't want to make a browser. Google would have been like, we're never. What is there to add? Microsoft just keeps kicking ass. What is there to do? And then Microsoft introduces .NET in the browser, and Todd sits back in a zen-like state. But they didn't. They didn't. They thought the browser war was won.
They did. It was called Silverlight.
Yeah, you know why you love Silverlight so much because.
But the Silverlight thing was after the browser war started again.
I know. Yeah. The thing I like about Silverlight is the applications I need to build are just they're so much better in Silverlight.
Because you're able to write C#. And why?
Well,
C#
I also
is
have
a typed language.
Though that's one thing. But the other two things is, and more importantly, is I have a .NET framework, and I have thread pools, and I have threading, and I have WCF.
You have the full .NET framework that you have to download on the client.
Not
you use it. That's insane.
I didn't have ASP.NET. It was Core CLR, man.
It was only 5. It was only 5 megs. It was only 5 megs.
It was no.
You only installed it once.
Silverlight was 5 megs. That was what the astounding thing was.
Silverlight was trying to solve the problem the right way.
The core Silverlight framework, and then you had to download your assemblies, your custom assemblies. That was the baseline was 5 megs.
Which all went to a nice little package. Kind of sounded like WebAssembly.
Yeah, WebAssembly is dead on the vine, man. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
And the reason why I think it's not going to happen is because in the end, like what made the web popular in the first place? It was the fact that you could open a text editor, type in some crap, and it worked.
Yep.
Well, now I can't do that if I have TypeScript. If I type in just a text editor, I need a TypeScript compiler.
TypeScript is aimed at developers that are willing to live with that friction. The web thrived because these folks who were just Photoshop people were like, I can make a web page. I can do it. Just give me a text. HTML, whatever. Okay, fine. I did it. Awesome. I'm a web developer. Woo!
I know. I've interviewed quite a few of this.
Yeah.
I worked with them. But ultimately, think about it, though. Are we using the right... Ultimately, as technologists, we should use the right tool and the right platform to solve the problem we're trying to solve. I'm not building Amazon.com. I'm building super complex dashboard with Excel. Because people were freaking goddamn Excel in their application.
So maybe those people should accept that they want a thick client, but I'm sure they're going to be like, no, it's got to be a web app.
People want both.
I was really frustrated that I wasn't able to jump in and put the counterpoint to your argument that you shouldn't be writing a lot of code in the browser anyway because JavaScript runs on the server now too. Right? You can use TypeScript to write Node code. And that argument is pretty much dead at that point. Then you do need a fully featured language, right? Then it is.
No, I mean that's
synonymous to C# on the server.
So the other thing I didn't bring up, and it was more about, it's something I read, and it's something that actually gets back to my point of adoption. With x86 coming, right? And if you're not a Microsoft shop, why not just use x86 6? Why use TypeScript? Why use the Microsoft branded thing when you can just use x86 6 with Babel?
Typing.
I think it's also.
But if I'm a JavaScript developer, I don't have typing today. I may want classes, but
there's a play being made here by Google and Microsoft, and one of these days they're going to announce that Edge and Chrome are going to natively support Angular and TypeScript, and you don't have to send anything to the browser.
Yep.
Yeah, and there was something awesome that's going to happen, but then it got cut from the freaking goddamn spec called Object.Observe, which is going to be in the browser. written in C++ code, and you would almost eliminate the need for data binding because it would be built into the browser. But they decided to drop it, and I'm like, what the fuck? That's what I need. These are the real things I need to solve my job. I am building complex applications. I don't need freaking stupid CSS animations. No, I have animations already. I need better stuff. I need freaking thread pools.
That's what you do need
God,
CSS animation.
I never use threading in the browser because developers can't do it. Developers just can't do it. They can't do it on the desktop. They can't do it.
I need to build are that complex. We need threading.
I can't. I don't want it. I don't want it ever. I wish it would just go away because I run into too much code. It just sucks, and it's like I can't fix it all. I'm only one person.
Okay, so Chris,
that's the spirit.
Chris and Jess, you probably should turn the Google thing off. Imagine if you had 20 clients in the same week, and they're all variations of that.
I can't fix all the code.
Literally, in a good week, I probably get 10 hours of writing code. Most of the other time is looking at code going, what the fuck, what's the developer doing?
Okay, so here's one of my problems with classes in general. Like, I'm really beginning to get down on object-oriented programming, and it's because we have these great guidelines, right? We have design patterns, the Gang of Four, we have solid, we have the idea that composition's better than inheritance, which like actually just takes a pillar, like it cuts off object-oriented programming at the knees because inheritance was supposed to be a pillar, right?
Yep.
But it sucks.
Yep.
It sucks.
Which I'd argue procedural or prototypical inheritance is composition. That's a different story.
Yeah, and so, and so, but the problem is so we have all these great guidelines, and then I go open a code base, and it's just like, look, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not the best in the world at solid and design patterns. I'm not. I make mistakes all the time, and I'm like, God, this is so hard. It's hard that I know I'm not perfect at it, and then I go look at this code base where, oh God, it's over-inherited. So here I am. Here, and there's too many methods on this interface, so now I want to go implement an object, and I've got to like do something stupid like not implemented exception because this interface is meaningless. I mean, this function is meaningless to me on this interface.
Yep.
Can I fix it? I don't know. I don't know if I can fix it, and I just don't think that we're going to be very good at it as human beings. It doesn't mean that some of us human beings aren't good at it. Like, I think, Jess, I think you're, I mean, I worked with you at Technicals. I think you're pretty good at it. I'm not as good. I all the time I kind of like get this, I get things going and I go, that object's wrong. That's doing too much. There's another responsibility there.
No, it's fun. I mean, it's organic, right? It's supposed to be iterative.
It's hard to be iterative in a team though, because what I find is I've tried to just take ownership of a code base and be like, no, I'm gonna fix it, and then I get like just blasted, like somebody changed all the code. It's terrible, and I'm like. That's what source control was for, right? Didn't you read the change?
I've found myself in recent years in the position of manager, so nobody really gets too upset when I go and change everything. At least they don't tell me about it.
So I used to be the crazy guy that would check all the entire project out so no one else could do work. Unfortunately, I don't have that time anymore. Well, but if I did, yes, I love refactoring.
That's part of it too. Is I don't have the
like,
time.
I'm like a freaking refactoring Nazi. Okay, you know what? This code can be written better. There's a better solution.
Yeah.
Check out the whole project. No more Go code in.
I mean, just recently,
places where I've renamed my freaking what do you call it? Eclipsis. One day, I convinced the entire team that they put the name of the project in front of the project, and I'm like, that's not the right name. So I sat there for 4 hours renaming every freaking namespace, recompiling the code, and fixing the 2,000 unit test to make sure it works, which was actually a lot harder than you think back in the freaking .NET 1.1 days.
That's the other thing is the unit tests. So then I have somebody, so then you run into that one developer who's like, I want my code to be testable, but they're really not very good at the solid part. So don't get me wrong, the code is testable, but it's got test-induced design damage.
Where they're testing property string name 1. Hey, I set the string, got a string back.
Yeah, and then the worst thing about it is that it's not really decoupled, it's just mocked all to heck. So then you do make an important business logic change and 200 unit tests break. Yeah. And it's like, that's a clue, right? That's a clue that you do not have a loosely coupled system, because that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, well, and that is what I consider solid. I don't consider solid necessarily OOP. principles and patterns. I consider them loosely coupling patterns, like decoupling patterns. And so they are four, and they work best with object orientation and objects, but you can apply them to functional concepts, right? I mean, you can apply them.
No, I know you can. I mean, that's the whole. I mean, I've been studying a lot of F# lately. I'm getting really interested.
Yeah. No, but I agree with you, Chris. The point you were making earlier, where I'm really having like a crisis of conscience of like defending object-oriented development at all, when the pillar is like there's a lot of great things of it, but all of it was just fundamentally based on inheritance, which is just fundamentally fucking wrong. It's just not playing out.
No, I agree with you. There's a lot of good things about the C# language, but it has a lot of bad parts, and one of them is inheritance.
Yeah.
Well, I argue that was one of the best things they did on making a single inheritance.
Well, actually, no. I was just going to say that was the mistake.
Nope. Is that was the?
Here's why. Here's why. I want to implement the observer pattern. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, what am I going to do? Am I going to implement an interface?
Yes.
So that means every object, even though the implementation is exactly the same, I have to re-implement the observer pattern in the implementation, just because I can't share implementation. I can't say this thing inherits from a standard observer. I can't do that.
Well,
it also inherits from its base class.
You could do a chain. That's one way of doing it.
But then once I start chaining, then I go look at a real life code base that I've lived in, right? And I go, okay, so somebody realized that they want that, so they put down in base controller, and I'm just going to use that. It doesn't matter what it is. Base whatever base, they implement the observer pattern.
Whatever base, that should be a design pattern. Whatever base.
But here's the problem. Then they built this on top of whatever base, and then that, and then that, and now I'm up here, and I don't need the third implementation. In fact, this is harmful. I have to override every function in it because it's wrong. It's not what I need for this job, but I need that observer implementation at the bottom. If I have multiple inheritance,
you've broken like three of the principles. You made it too complex. Every class should be small with one function.
I've already come to the I've already come to the code base. Someone's already screwed up. I don't have time to rewrite it all.
Dude, and this is what we're not having in the podcast, right? We're not having this conversation and this passion in the I think we need to have a show where we basically start out by saying, look, we're just going to go talk for the next hour. And if we just lose you, if we just completely lose you, feel free to turn it off. We're not going to be offended, right? And then just pick up on the next episode, because the next episode will be back to our normal format. And then we just have this fucking conversation.
The problem is every show that I think of is literally, it's a translation for what I can't stand seeing at work.
What you're doing wrong, and here's how to fix it, stupid motherfuckers.
I will stand by this for 100%.
All of the
is a solution. We need to eliminate 90% of developers.
Like for instance, remember that meaning of null? You know what that really was called? It was called, I'm really sick and tired of null reference exceptions. So we're going to have a whole episode where I bitch about it, but instead I'm going to say, please stop. And then some of these other ones that I've proposed, right? Like the what's in the box one. You know what that's called? That's really called, I'm sick and tired of not being able to get any tools paid for. Just bother. It's like, hey, we'd like to do some profiling. Oh, well, what? Can't you just write some console logs? Yes, that is what we should be doing.
So Chris, I'm gonna give you a small piece of advice that took me a long time to understand. When you start arguing with yourself, it's time to leave. Because most of the time, you will eventually reach a point where the only person you're arguing with is yourself. No one else cares.
Or this one.
Because if they cared, it would change.
Like the V2 will be better one, right? How many times have I lived through that? Let's just. You know what we really need to do? We need to rebuild this system. And it doesn't ever have. It never works. It doesn't work right. Never happens.
Have you guys uploaded your audio, by the way?
I can't do my noise thing when you guys are here.
What? No, no, you don't. Just grab it from the recording.
You can highlight a piece of your recording where you weren't talking.
Yeah.
And then when you see noise reduction, there's that get noise profile, and but it's got to be highlighted. And you click that button while it's highlighted, and it doesn't tell you it's doing anything. So you sit there going, I don't think it's doing anything. Yeah. Then you highlight the whole. I don't know if you have to highlight the whole thing, but I do.
Yeah, you have to highlight it in order for the menu to work.
Yeah.
But when I do the get nose profile, I basically pick like the 10 seconds where Jess is saying hello and welcome and today. Make sure you listen to us on iTunes. Like I grab that part.
Oh, I didn't say iTunes this
No,
time.
you've been
Damn
good.
it.
You've been good for a long time. So, anyways, yes, that's what I get passionate about. Is like, and you're right. You're totally right, Todd. Is like, well, your code base is messed up. I know. I can't fix it though. I got to live in it. And if there was multiple inheritance, then at least maybe I had a fighting chance to say like, I just want to inherit from you, and I'm good now.
But aren't you
Or
ultimately
if-
potentially making it worse?
Right. If you had multiple inheritance, maybe you could think about how much worse your whole code base would be. Maybe this particular problem would be easier, but the rest of your code base would be the fucking 10 levels of hell. What is it? 7?
I
What?
don't know.
7 layers of hell.
I don't know.
I can tell you that the best part of being a consultant and the worst part of being a consultant is exactly what you just described. So the best part is I get to leave someday. I'm
Yeah.
not married to the code. The worst part is I have to pick my battles.
Yeah. No, I understand.
So when I can, I pick the battles I can win. And so for me, the biggest battle I always win is if you have more than 3 parameters past your thing, that's getting refactored. I'm sorry. You got to learn to be a good developer. Learn classes. Then we get to JavaScript, and oh my god, the code I see with JavaScript. And people have actually trained. They're like, yes, we make perfect sense. Then you leave them alone for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden they have this mess. And I'm like, you took more effort to create this mess. If you just follow what I told you.
Yeah.
I mean, JavaScript obviously has a lot of bad parts that should have never been put in. But I think the biggest, I feel like the biggest thing I get frustrated with is the pretend syntax to make it look like Java, the new and the this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that adds a layer.
So in my own personal JavaScript, I'm just not going to use those anymore. Now the problem is then I have to go to work, and unfortunately the reality is people have learned they've gotten it shoved into their head that you make a constructor function, right? That's how you create objects. And it's like no, I can create an object just by however I want. Just, here's an object. Just
That's my problem. Sometimes I'll create it. I'm like, this time I'm going to use the colon to create my classes. Next time, I'm just going to use function this side and this, and it's too many different ways.
But yeah,
The thing that challenges me is I interview so many freaking developers for the last 2 years, and it just shocks the hell out of me. 2 things. They claim they're senior .NET developers. You ask them .NET questions that, to me, senior developers should know. Like, I'm big on the garbage collector. Explain to me how it works.
oh cool.
And
I wanted to know what you
describe it.
asked so that I can fail your interview, but I do
Exactly.
know.
But then we get into things like, okay, you said you were senior, so I asked you something I consider senior developers to know. So then I get down to like, whoa, explain to me the different string abstraction interfaces. And they kind of fumble through that. And then we get back to, well, how's a string immutable? And they're glassy-eyed. And their resumes, you look at them and going like, they look like they're legit. They should know these things. There's so many people I'm like, so if I do string.replace, how many objects I have when I'm done? And they're like, well, there's just one still. And I'm like, you don't understand the fundamentals.
Well, the code makes it look that way. That does not an excuse.
Yeah,
but it
but
makes it look that
if
way.
you're going to interview for a job and it
I know.
says
I agree with you.
JavaScript
There's
is
no excuse.
shouldn't you spend at least an hour before the interview kind of going, hey, let me make sure I get the fundamentals down?
I think a lot of people don't know that stuff because to something that Jess has said before is you weren't supposed to have to know, right?
But with JavaScript you cheat yourself. You
The
put
memory
everything in
management-
global. You
The
ran
memory
the problems.
management was supposed to take care of string immutable. Who cares? Garbage collector, do your thing.
Or
I actually have a working hypothesis on why that's important now.
And people tell me, so you're a JavaScript developer. Yeah, I know JavaScript, so you know closures. No, I know jQuery.
I know
You're
JavaScript.
not a JavaScript developer.
What are you talking about, dude? Dot on, click. Come on, let's go. How do you change the value of a text field? Dollar dot text. Then you in parentheses you put the string you want to change it to. It's not that hard. Come on. Well, first you use dollar to select the element, and then you just dot text on it, and
How do you append a child?
you use the dollar. You find the element,
So
and then
what does
you
dollar mean?
Dollars, that's the JavaScript function.
So what if I said you should dollar? I did jQuery parentheses, and one guy was like, "Well, that's not right. You have to use the dollar." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh no."
That's not how jQuery works. jQuery is dollar, and then you find the element you want.
The best code I've seen though in the last year though, I've seen quite a bad code, but this was the best. Customer, they had me look at their code because they wanted to know how they can improve the code or what architecture they wanted to use, and they had a reference to prototype function for the prototype library, not jQuery.
Oh yeah.
We're using jQuery and Bootstrap CSS classes, and then some other CSS, some random CSS to put things on. And the actual page only had like 20 lines of code in it. It wasn't doing anything yet. But the fact that there was references to prototype, but then we're doing jQuery stuff. By the way, he's not a fan, according to everything I found about classes.
No,
he's
gosh,
not.
no. He says it's
is?
the absolute worst feature of ECMAScript 6. But
We
see,
all
here's the thing. Here's the thing, though, Jess. It's beyond just a fan of classes. He feels that that object-oriented programming has failed us,
Sure.
and classes have failed us. And
Right,
we
but
should move
types
on
are not
to
objects.
functional programming. Well, see, that's the thing. I agree with you. Types are not classes. You don't have to define. You don't have to combine data and behavior. You're right.
Right.
I mean, look, even functional languages have records,
Right.
and discriminated unions and all that stuff. Yeah,
Right.
I know. I don't disagree with you.
Do you
You need to
really
be able to
think about
define the
developers you
concept.
know, Chris? Do you really think functional programming is going to be any better for them?
No, it's hard. It's especially hard for an object-oriented programmer. I'm telling you, it's like I'm cracking my brain open again.
Yeah.
From when I went from C, I remember going from C to C++ and having to break my brain open to understand this whole crazy, ridiculous notion of what do you mean data member? I don't understand. What the problem was, as a C developer, you would just keep saying why don't I just declare a type and use it? And it wasn't like, no, we put the data and the behavior together.
Yeah.
And then I got that beaten into my head, and now
I argue and I haven't done much functional programming. That's a good thing. To think out of the box a little bit. That can make you a better programmer. The thing I find is C#. Wait 2 years. It'll be more functional.
It is, yeah. No, I agree. Mads is definitely definitely bringing functional features in, and he makes a good argument for where functional programming fails, which is good because it was the first time I saw somebody make that argument. It generally has to do. Gosh, I'd have to set it up, and to be honest, it's probably a little late. I'd have to think about it, but
No, that's fine. We don't need to talk about it now.
there's a good video that he did, and I watched it, and I said, yeah, you're right.
There are no silver bullets.
So, Todd,
Yes.
what is your cat's name?
Sammy.
What?
Sammy.
Sammy?
Yes.
Because I think he is an honorary fourth member of the show at this point. He's been in
What's
every
she?
single recording. Oh, she. She's been in every single recording in the same exact spot.
Yes. She's the overseer.
Yeah.
All right, so Jess wants us screaming and yelling. So what does that mean we talk about?
No. I didn't necessarily say that. I really wasn't even joking about having an episode here and there. Kind of like how Hanselman has Hansel Minutes, where he's like, all right, bear with me, and we're just going to talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about for this one episode.
Yeah, I could see doing
then,
it once every 4 episodes or so, having something a little more informal.
Yeah, just take the gloves off and just be like, and just
the title of the show comes later, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I think the problem is we're going to end up like this. We're going to be all over the place.
No, and that's what I'm saying. That's fine. And so we time box it. We literally say, for the next hour, and we're not going to go over an hour, we're just going to talk about whatever comes to mind. And it's literally like sitting down at a bar and hitting record. And I think people will genuinely like that until they don't, until they get so confused and lost that they're just done. And then we just give them permission to just turn off the podcast at that point. That's fine. Don't waste your time trying to understand what we're talking about.
He doesn't like the user group. You actually can leave.
Yes. Right. This isn't like locking the door like we do at the user group where you're not allowed to leave. No, but then promise in the next episode we'll get back to the standard format and we'll explain things better and we'll be back to the boring monotone voices again.
Have you guys had an ES6 talk at your group?
No. We haven't even had a TypeScript talk.
Have you had a Git talk?
Nope.
No.
You could really use someone to do a Git talk.
Yeah, those are like two things I'm concentrating on now, so maybe I'll make them into talks.
Hurry up, do the Git talk. Otherwise, I'm going to do it. But I'm going to focus on TypeScript first. No, that's.
I'm in charge of
completely agree
scheduling
with
though,
Tom.
so his TypeScript thing will be like 6 months from now.
I have full control over the meetup site. I can schedule myself whenever I like.
So speaking of full control, do you know Devin's still paying for that?
Yeah. No, it's fine. Twilio's paying for it.
Yes. So
I
that's
mean, we
always
should probably
funny.
attribute them somewhere, but
Because someone came up to him at the code camp, and they're like, "Why is your picture
Yeah.
still on the front?" He goes, "Because we pay for the site." And I'm like, "Oh, that's right."
yeah.
All right, I gotta get to bed.
Yeah, me too. All right. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
This was awesome. So no Sunday, we said.
Yeah, let's. I
Can
think
we at least do like next Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that?
I'm fine with meeting Sunday to discuss things. I really think we need to separate that a little bit.
Yeah, I hear you.
Only because I think will give us a little more time to kind of focus. Because we can come up with an outline, at least even or just bullet points, and then we can spend a couple days like making sure we're only thinking about that.
Yes, I don't necessarily think that we need to actually get on Skype though to do that. I think we just need to be better about coming up with an outline and then just Skyping everybody and saying it's on OneNote, go check it out days before rather than the day before or the day of.
So we should at least pick a topic. Or by end of day Friday, send out what we think the topic should be.
Yeah, I got nothing that's like killing me to talk about right now.
Because we covered 18,000 of your list here that had TypeScript.
Oh yeah, we got to clean up the list now. Well, no, those are all different episodes on TypeScript. So
okay,
there are more things to talk about.
There's still more.
Yeah.
I mean, I would really like to talk about Chris's in the box.
Yeah, I keep going back to that one. So here I'm gonna be completely honest. Which one was it?
Well, I just want to make Chris talk more. I didn't feel like we gave Chris enough time to talk to this one.
I completely agree. Yeah, what's in the box? That is one of the ones where I'm fully willing to go and be the moderator because I'm not really sure I have a whole lot to say.
The thing is, I'm not sure it's a full show other than buy your developer stuff.
Yeah.
Well, no, we can talk about.
Huh? What's wrong with OOP? That's what we were just talking about. Maybe that's our just like drop the format and have a conversation about OOP.
So I'd want to argue what's wrong with developers. OOP's not the problem.
What's the deal with developers?
It's that people don't want to learn, or they don't have the time to learn.
Yeah. Stupid developers.
Hire the best. Pay for the best. You get what you pay for.
Developers. V2 will be better. I'm interested to hear. I honestly don't even know what my opinion on that is. I think I agree with you.
All right, anyway. We said try by the end of Friday, and we all can pick one, and maybe we'll see if we can get consensus.
Okay. I am definitely behind having one where Chris takes the lead. And it sounds like that's what's in the box.
Oh, what's in the box? Did you hear us, Chris? Did we lose him?
Did you lose your
audio?
audio?
But he's not talking. He's not in the box.
What's in the box? Not audio.
Chris's head's in the box.
Oh, okay.
We can't hear you.
Oh, you can hear me.
I hear you. I just don't hear him.
All right. Well, I think that marks the end of the night. At least the end of the broadcast.
Yes, let's end the